Chapter 722. The twilight was deep. In the guest room in the backyard, the old man who led the way pointed to the two adjacent rooms with their wooden doors wide open. He turned his head and said politely, "Both of you, this is where you will rest tonight. It's a little shabby, so please bear with it. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me over." Alan nodded and smiled. "Haha, you're too polite. We're very satisfied with this place. Thank you." "Haha, that's good. Then good night." "Good night." After sending off the old man, Alan took a light breath and turned to look at Lena, who had been in a daze and silent. He frowned. "Sister Lena, why didn't you let me say it just now?" Lena subconsciously avoided his gaze, looked at the tip of her foot, and kicked. "Say what?" "Say you've been waiting here for 3 to 4 months for Brother Tang in to return safely. Say you've been praying in the church in the city during the day and praying for Brother Tang in at night. Say you like Brother Tang in the silent night." Alan's tone sounded a little hurried, puzzled, and even a little angry. He was very clear about how much Lena liked Tang in and how much she had paid for it. But now that she finally had the opportunity to meet him, she seemed to shrink back at the last minute. During the conversation just now, she almost didn't talk to Tang in alone. Lena paused her footsteps, and a trace of pain flashed through her lowered eyes. She shook her head calmly. "You've misunderstood. I don't like Mr. Tang in." "You are kidding." Alan looked at Lena and said quickly, "Don't forget, the 2-story house that Brother Tang in bought in Lion City was bought by me. The place you lived in other cities was exactly the same as that 2-story house. You haven't forgotten about Brother Tang in. And don't say any more. You've been studying alchemy knowledge day and night for the past 2 years. Isn't it to help Brother Tang in? And this time," I said, "I just told you that something happened to the Gray Coat Army. You immediately put down everything you were doing and almost fooled me. You ignored the danger and came to the north alone," she suddenly shrieked. "Stop talking." Lena suddenly raised her head. Her eyes were red, and 2 lines of tears fell from her eyes. "Yes, I like Tang in. Are you satisfied?" Silence. The night wind gently blew through the courtyard. As if it could feel the sorrowful atmosphere here, it subconsciously lightened its steps. After a long while, Alan lowered his head and spread out his hands, saying in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Sister Lena. I just want you and Brother Tang in to have a good ending." Lena raised her head and gently wiped away her tears. She took a deep breath and said, "Alan, it's not your fault. I know you're doing this for my own good, but that's impossible." "Why?" "Well, Josiah." Alan was undoubtedly smart. When he thought of Lena's excitement when she received the news this morning and compared it with the sudden silence now, he immediately realized something and was startled. "You're saying that Brother Tang in and Josiah..." Lena was silent. Tang in still underestimated a woman's intuition, or it could be said that he underestimated a woman's meticulous observation of things in different angles. Josiah could see the strangeness in Lena's eyes. How could Lena not discover something from the way Josiah looked at Tang? And perhaps it was all because of love. It was always easy to find similarities in each other. After coming back to his senses, Alan opened his mouth and said after a moment, "So you gave up? Why? You think you can't compare to Josiah? She's a magician, but you're also a 5th-level alchemist. She's good-looking, but you're not worse than her, Sister Lena. What's more, didn't you know Brother Tang in before she did? Or is it because..." After a pause, he thought of something and said with a frown, "She once asked the high priest to cure your leg? Because of gratitude, you don't want to compete with her." "No, it's not because of that." Murmuring in a low voice, Lena shook her head and then forced a smile. "Alan, this matter ends here. I'm tired. You should rest early." After saying that, she waved her hand and turned to the room on the left. Seeing this, Alan was stunned and suddenly said, "Sister Lena, don't give up. You still have a chance." Lena's footsteps paused, and then she walked into the room. "It's true. I've traveled extensively over the years and dealt with a lot of people. Brother Tang in seems to be cold, but that's only to his enemies. He's actually not good at rejecting his own people. As long as you don't give up, he won't have the heart to reject you." "Pa!" The door closed, and the room was pitch black. Lena seemed to have lost all her strength, and her back was pressed against the wooden door as she slowly slid down. Impossible. It's already impossible. Hugging her knees and curling up, her faint sobs slowly echoed in the silent room. You don't deserve it, Lena. You don't deserve it. The next morning, when it was time to leave, Josiah had been out for a long time. She was the leader of more than 100,000 people in the Gray Coat Army. Now that the traitor, the Bosco family, had been eradicated, she naturally had to rush back in time. The scouts who came out with her didn't go back with her, just in case. In the end, Josiah decided to leave these people here for Tang-Un to use, lest they expose Tang-Un's existence when they returned. As for her own safety, Luke and the others were responsible for it. Outside the city, Tang-Un was telling Luke to be careful on the way back. He had to send Josiah back to the camp safely and then rush back in time. Actually, with Luke and the others' abilities, it wouldn't be difficult for them to break through the blockade silently. Tang-Un had been too concerned and had blurted out a few more things, of course. It was undoubtedly safer for Tang-Un to escort them himself, but there was indeed no need for that, and Josiah refused. In addition, Tang-Un had something important to do, so he didn't insist. On the other side, Josiah lifted the curtain and looked at Lena, who was saying goodbye to Alan not far away. After thinking for a moment, he got out of the carriage. That was right. As the president of a large chamber of commerce, Alan had a lot of things to deal with every day. This time, in order to accompany Lena and wait for Twain's news, he had stayed here all this time. Now that he had achieved his goal, he naturally couldn't stay here any longer. Hey, Lena, Alan, I hope I didn't disturb you. Seeing Alan shake his head and leave, Josiah came over to greet them. Lena was stunned when she saw this, but then she pursed her lips and smiled gently. Of course not. Well, Alan, you have a lot of things to do. You should leave early. He had already been here for a few months. No matter how many things he had to do, there was no hurry, Alan thought. But when he raised his head and met Lena's meaningful gaze, the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. He raised his hand and vaguely said goodbye to Josiah. Then, he waved at Tang-Un, who had already greeted him, and turned around to get into the carriage and leave. Alan is also from Lion City, right? Speaking of which, he helped me so much this time. I haven't had the chance to formally thank him. Seeing the carriage gradually disappear, Josiah said with some regret, "Oh, it's nothing. Actually, we're all on the same side. You don't have to be so polite." Lena replied with a faint smile. "Yes, we're all on the same side." Josiah nodded lightly and then smiled. "Hee. Then can I ask you for another favor?" "Of course, no problem. Miss Josiah, please feel free to ask. Just call me Josiah." "Hee. As you know, I'm no longer a noble lady." Josiah smiled and spread out her hands. She paused and said, "I just want to ask you to take care of Tang-Un. Is that okay?" After saying this, Josiah blinked and instantly took in all the expressions on Lena's face. Women were all selfish, especially towards their own men. This was understandable. As for expecting them to say things like, "As long as you treat me well, I don't care how many women you have outside," it was undoubtedly childish and laughable. It was also unrealistic. Josiah was still a little worried about Lena, so she took this opportunity to test her. Her question was considered clever. Firstly, she was vaguely declaring her sovereignty. After all, if they weren't close to a certain extent, how could she ask for his care? Secondly, she wanted to see Lena's reaction and judge her thoughts. Lena was stunned for a moment, then nodded calmly. "I'll try my best. You know, the only thing I can help him with is alchemy. I can't guarantee anything else." "Oh, that's enough. Thank you, Lena." A normal reaction. Josiah's heart was slightly relieved. Although her doubts hadn't completely dissipated, there was no doubt that she was much more relaxed. "It's nothing. I already said you don't have to be so polite," Lena replied with a smile, but her hands behind her back were tightly clasped together, faintly showing green marks at this moment. "Hee, what are you guys talking about?" Tang-Un walked over with a smile. Josiah glanced sideways, pursed his lips, and said, "I'm asking Lena to take care of you." "Eh, what's there to take care of me for?" After chatting for a while, Tang In smiled apologetically at Lena, then pulled Josiah away. Looking left and right, she sneakily stuffed a small booklet over and hurriedly said, "Quick, keep it well, keep it well." Josiah took it in confusion. "What's this?" "Hee hee. Do you still remember what I told you before? I can't remember everything about Jean Ping Mei, but some of the postures inside, cough cough, the knowledge that can be used as reference is not difficult for me. Study hard. As long as you understand the essence, you won't be afraid, even if your period comes." "Ah!" With a scream, Josiah's face instantly turned red. As if holding a hot potato, she was about to throw the booklet far away. Seeing this, Tang In hurriedly waved his hand to stop her. "Don't. I've been working hard for a few days." "Hey, don't do it. Working hard. Working hard. I made you work hard." Josiah instantly went berserk. Raising her magic wand, she chased after Tang In, who was covering his head and running away like a rat. The scene was very lively for a moment. Not far away, David, Luke, and the others naturally roared with laughter when they saw this. Although they didn't know the reason, there was no lack of people who joined in the fun and booed. Clearly, they weren't afraid of things getting out of hand. Lena was also smiling, but her smile was very, very bitter. Chapter 723. The song ended and the crowd dispersed. After bidding farewell to Josiah and Alan, Tang In did not leave Coldwater City immediately. Instead, he returned and settled down here. Originally, Tang In and Josiah wanted to kidnap a few alchemists back to the camp. But now that they had Lena's help, they naturally did not need to do so. As soon as they returned to Coldwater City, Tang In ordered David and the others to find a remote place and then purchase a set of alchemy equipment in the name of the Yatong Chamber of Commerce. He let Lena focus on studying the unknown weapon and telescope. Then, Tang In gathered the people in charge of the surrounding secret agencies and got them to operate again. The first task was to find the various addresses of the Bounty Hunter Guild. As for Tang In, after issuing all the orders, he shut himself in the room at the contact point and did not leave the room for the whole day, completely entering a state of seclusion. In fact, Tang In had long planned to go into seclusion. Although he had been chased and killed during the previous trip to the northern wilderness and his life had been hanging by a thread, he had indeed gained a lot. More importantly, he had a vague understanding of the direction in which his strength would increase in the future. It had to be said that cultivation was also something that could make people addicted, especially this kind of stifling feeling of stepping on the threshold. It really made people have a strong desire to go one step further. Of course, having the desire was one thing, and actually doing it was another. Tang In was first wanted by the entire continent when he returned this time, and then he was in a hurry to catch up with the Bosco family. Later on, he officially established a relationship with Josiah. After going in a big circle, he finally had the opportunity to go into seclusion in peace. 5 days later, in the morning, David arrived at the contact point covered in dust. After greeting the surrounding secret guards, he went straight to Tang In's place. Of course, he knew that Tang In was in seclusion, but he still decided to try his luck because there was progress in the matter he was in charge of. The place where Tang In went into seclusion was an independent courtyard. As soon as David stepped into the courtyard, his footsteps couldn't help but stop. His eyes opened wide like copper bells, and his expression was extremely stunned, of course. This was not a reaction to being rejected. In fact, as soon as David entered, he saw Tang In's figure in the courtyard. However, there were two of them. In the center of the courtyard, Tang In raised his head slightly and looked at Dongfang Jiaoyang with his hands behind his back, his expression calm. Yes, he should be basking in the sun. As if he felt David's gaze, he turned his head slightly and looked over with an expressionless face. Tang In's figure was also standing under the eaves on the left. His eyes were narrowed slightly, and his expression was just as calm. However, his right hand was stretched out flatly, as if he was trying to touch something. What was even stranger was that the 5 fingers on his right hand had actually disappeared into thin air, leaving behind only a bare palm. Opening his mouth, David was completely dumbfounded. Illusion? Or was it an illusion? In broad daylight, Hallucinations were naturally not possible. However, David also didn't think that the two figures in front of him were illusions. David's movement speed was slightly inferior. Even if he used all his strength to dash forward, it was impossible for him to pull out an illusion. However, he still had his eyesight. He knew that illusions were ultimately just illusions. Although they had the same appearance and movements as the main body, it was absolutely impossible for one of them to look at him, while the other, run to the side and perform a magic trick. Was it a disguise? That wasn't very likely. Not to mention David's attainments in disguise techniques, he was also keenly aware of the slight differences between the two figures. The figure basking in the sun in the courtyard looked a little fainter. Of course, this was only a vague feeling. That was because this figure also had a nose and eyes and didn't lack any parts. However, David felt that it was a little unreal, a little illusory. Just when David was in shock, bang, there was a soft explosion. Tang In, who was under the eaves on the left, suddenly shook. His right hand, which was trying to touch the figure, seemed to have touched a landmine and was shaken back. His arm was thrown back, and his body swayed as he took half a step back. At the same time, the bare palm returned to its original state, and all 5 fingers were there. Before David had time to be shocked, he suddenly felt an invisible and intangible force surging in the air, like ripples spreading in the water. He subconsciously raised his fist to block it. Whoosh! The force was not strong. After being blocked, it only raised the hem of David's clothes. However, it was undeniable that this force was really there. Oh, it's David. Tang In, who was under the eaves, first shook his head slightly, looking a little regretful. Then he looked up and saw the shocked David. He greeted him. What's the matter? With a wave of his hand, the figure in the middle of the courtyard produced a slight ripple and instantly disappeared out of thin air, as if it had never appeared. David didn't come back to his senses for a while. He looked at Tang Nun, then looked at the empty center of the courtyard and rubbed his eyes. What's the situation? Nothing. It's just an illusory doppelganger. After a simple explanation, Tang In walked over with a smile. Doppelganger? David still scratched his head with a puzzled look. Then he looked up and down at Tang In and asked tentatively, "You are the real boss?" The corner of his mouth twitched. Tang In raised his hand and patted the back of David's head. "Pa," he said angrily. "Nonsense, what do you think?" David first laughed subconsciously, and then exclaimed with joy, "Boss, you've succeeded in your closed-door training?" This was not David's nonsense, but the current Tang In was indeed a little different. How should he put it? If the previous Tang In was thrown into a crowd, he would not be eye-catching at all. But if the current Tang In was thrown into the crowd, not only would he look inconspicuous, but he would also be a little floating, as if he could disappear in an instant. David didn't know what it meant to return to one's natural state. He just vaguely felt that Tang In had some changes. And in his eyes, this change was naturally a symbol of improvement in strength. However, Tang In shook his head, half and half. It's not a complete success, but there are some gains. This was the truth. The attack method that Tang In wanted to break through the most was the subtle realm of space. But this was not completely successful. Just like what David saw just now, he just entered the door and inserted half of his palm, and then he was pushed out by the repulsive force of the space inside. However, this intra-level understanding should not be underestimated. Tang Un's shadow invisibility skill, which had not been very active, and the shadow clone skill that he had just obtained after leveling up, had officially reached the next level and obtained a qualitative improvement. In general, Tang In's closed-door training this time was a success, and his strength had also taken a key step forward. At this time, David suddenly slapped his forehead and remembered something. "By the way, boss, there is news from the secret agency. They found the addresses of several bounty hunter guilds." Tang In raised his eyebrows when he heard this. "Oh, where are they? Tell me in detail." If Tang In wanted to build his own assassin organization, he must first start with the bounty hunter guild. This was absolutely unavoidable. The Bounty Hunter Guild had a long history. Not to mention the entire brand, it should be everywhere in the North. It was undoubtedly difficult to successfully seize the channel market from the hands of this behemoth. Tang An's way of dealing with this situation was very simple. It was completely the style of an assassin, which was to find the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild and then find a way to wipe them out. To be honest, this was also a helpless move. The Bounty Hunter Guild was everywhere. If they were found one by one and killed, not only would they alert the enemy, but even if they succeeded, they would not cause much damage to the other party. Moreover, Tang An did not have the time to waste on them. The only way was to completely hurt the other party, and it would be best if they could not make a comeback for a few years. This was in line with Tang An's plan of establishing an assassin organization. According to your instructions, the secret agency this time found the addresses of low-level guilds such as towns and small cities. Judging from the results now, the nearest guild to Hanshui City is the Fallen Wood Town, which is 100 miles to the south. As the saying goes, sharpening a knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood. If he wanted to defeat his opponent, he must have a good understanding of them. Tang An never underestimated his opponent. Not to mention this time it was a big guy, so it was undoubtedly necessary to start from a small place first. Fallen Wood Town. Touching his chin, Tang indecisively waved his hand. Let's go there. Gather the brothers in the gray space. We will go there tonight to guide them. And we can also learn from them. Oh yeah. Chapter 724. In the evening, in Fallen Wood Town. It was called a town, but in terms of size, it was about the size of a small city. Thinking about it, if a slightly ambitious mayor was transferred over, this place might develop into a city. At sunset, about 20 strangers came in from all the entrances of the town. They had different identities, such as travelers, bards, merchants, etc. No one cared about their common professional identities. After these people gathered in the middle of the town, a handsome young man wearing a wide hat looked around. In front of him was a large hotel, and at the end of the left side of the street was the sign of the police station. He could not help but shake his head and smack his lips. TSK, built next to the police station. Is this the legendary saying that the most dangerous place is the safest? Good idea. David quickly noted down. We still have to learn from others about this. Needless to say, this person with long silver hair was Tang An. This disguise was actually quite familiar. It was Yema who died in Tang An's hands. What made Tang An was the large hotel in front of him. If the information was correct, this was a branch of the Bounty Hunter Guild. However, just one street away was the police station in the town. It had to be said that this bold idea was really unexpected. It was known that the Brand Empire and the Bounty Hunter Guild's attitude had always been to kill the wrong person rather than let them go. But even so, the other party still dared to set the location here. This courage made Twain think highly of them. Okay, I'll go in and check out the situation first. You guys observe the surroundings. 5 minutes later, you guys sneak in and be sure to bring out all the information of this guild. No problem, boss. David, who was dressed as a merchant guard, nodded calmly and responded confidently. The other party was the famous Bounty Hunter Guild, but they were in a gray space. Who were they afraid of? Hey, David, what you're doing is wrong. Harry, who was dressed as a merchant, waved his hand discontentedly. I'm your employer. I haven't spoken yet. Why do you have to speak first? This is a flaw. You don't even know the basics of disguise. What should I say to you? Let go. David bent his arm and strangled Harry's neck in a seemingly intimate manner. His muscles were tight, and Harry's eyes kept rolling back. His words were muffled, as if he had a date pit in his mouth. He raised his head and forced a smile. Boss, after you. Rubbing his forehead, Tang An was also a little speechless. He simply ignored them, walked across the street, and entered the hotel. Although it was a large hotel, the decorations inside were ordinary. It was not too luxurious, but it was not shabby either. It looked normal. Tang An glanced at it and nodded slightly. The location could be chosen boldly, but the more ordinary the details, the better. That way, it would not attract attention. In short, it was quite interesting. After entering the hotel, Tang An did not go to the counter like ordinary guests. Instead, he casually found a seat in the hall and sat down. The layout of the hall was also interesting. There was a moderate gap between all the seats. In the middle, there were potted plants, sculptures, and other decorations. It seemed to have a unique taste, but in fact, it ensured that each seat had a relatively independent space. As soon as he sat down, a waiter came over with a professional smile and bowed slightly. "Good evening, sir. How can I help you?" Tang did not hide anything and said directly, "Take me to the guild." The waiter looked at Tang, but his vision was blocked by the wide hat. Naturally, he could not see anything. He shook his head lightly and said without changing his expression, "Sorry, sir. I don't understand what you mean." Sure enough, the Bounty Hunter Guild was different from the Thieves Guild. It was impossible to open all 4 doors and let anyone walk in. If Tang did not guess wrongly, he would have to show a token or something in order to enter. Tang did not have a token, but this did not mean that he did not have a way. He reached out and took off the wide hat. His long silver hair was very eye-catching. He looked up and stared at the waiter, whose pupils were rapidly contracting. He said lightly, "Can I go in now?" Wait, mister, I need to ask for instructions." The waiter obviously knew Yema, which was normal. After all, Yema's arrest warrant was still hanging high in the brand. He waved his hand casually. "Go." Tangan was not worried that Yema's identity would cause him any trouble. In his opinion, bounty hunters were all greedy people. Yema's strength was unquestionable. He believed that no one would dare to provoke him. As for the Bounty Hunter Guild, it was just a platform. With their bad relationship with the Brand Empire, it was naturally impossible for them to do anything to Yema. Tangan did not wait in the same place. Instead, he walked a few steps and avoided the obstacles. He watched the waiter walk to the counter and whisper something to the owner. Then, the owner of the hotel looked up and seemed to be very shocked. Soon, the waiter came back, bowed, and said, "Mister, please follow me." Tang pressed down on the brim of his hat and furrowed his brows imperceptibly. For some reason, although the waiter still had a professional smile, Tang felt an almost unconcealable fear from him. Things seemed a little strange. However, Tang did not understand what was going on. Could it be that Yemo really had enemies all over the world? Even in this ordinary town, there was a victim? He followed the waiter and passed through the hall. He did not go to the accommodation area at the back of the hotel. Instead, he suddenly turned and walked to the side path. He came to a slightly dark corridor. The waiter was very familiar with this place. He did not light up and directly walked in. Tang silently observed the surroundings and followed him. Tap, tap, tap. In the dark corridor, only the light footsteps of the 2 people could be heard. After walking for about a dozen steps, Tang's long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed. The situation was not right. Although there was the cover of the twilight, Tang could still sense that the waiter in front of him suddenly tensed up. He seemed to be very nervous. At this moment, his ears suddenly twitched. Clack, clack, clack. Tangan's 5 senses were unquestionably sharp. Although the clack sound coming from behind the stone wall was so slight that it could be ignored, it was still caught by his sharp ears. This was the sound of machinery turning. Tangan's footsteps paused. At this moment, the waiter in front of him suddenly slapped somewhere on the wall. The ground under his feet disappeared, and half of his body suddenly disappeared. There was a mechanism. "You're courting death." With a roar, Twain's figure rapidly retreated like a flickering light. At the same time, another shadow appeared out of thin air and instantly pounced to the side of the waiter. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the waiter's neck that was about to disappear and simply twisted it. Crack! At this time, Tang could no longer care about the victory of the shadow doppelganger, because the originally solid stone walls of the corridor around him were suddenly densely packed with holes like a hornet's nest. Countless flashing cold lights were hidden in the holes. At the entrance behind him, a black iron door was silently sliding down, blocking his retreat. There was no doubt that Tang had been set up. This was not a corridor, but a dead end densely packed with mechanisms. However, it was obvious that the other party had underestimated his speed. It was only a few dozen meters. To Tang This was just a breath's time. Boom! The iron door slammed down heavily. In the dark corridor, as soon as the shadowed doppelganger disappeared, whoosh, 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 countless arrows shot out rapidly from the holes, whistling nonstop, and instantly flooded every corner of the corridor. Listening to the dense, muffled sounds behind the iron door, Tang In slowly turned around and looked at the hundreds of people behind him, led by the hotel owner, who were holding various weapons and surrounding him in a daze. He nodded expressionlessly. Good, the design of this secret passage is good. It's worth learning. After a pause, he asked why. Kill him. Without answering Tang In's question, the hotel owner waved the long knife in his hand with a ferocious expression. The hundreds of people rushed forward in an instant, raised their weapons high, and swung them down. Clang, clang, clang. It was like the dense sound of iron being forged in a blacksmith shop. Many weapons collided together, but only Tang In's figure was missing. Boom! A loud noise came from behind. Everyone subconsciously turned their heads and saw Tang In holding the hotel owner's neck with one hand. His body rushed forward, smashing several walls in succession. Boom, 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 leaving a series of big holes. He directly went through the hotel and came to the street outside. He waved his hand and smashed it down. Bang! In the middle of the street, under the dumbfounded gazes of countless passers-by, Tang In stepped on the chest of the hotel owner, who was badly mutilated and vomiting blood continuously. He leaned over and said, I'm asking you why you F***king. F***ck. This world is bad. Do you still have any F***king professional ethics? Chapter 725. Beep. Beep. In the deep twilight, shrill police whistles hovered above the town. The sound of horse hooves was mixed with the screams of passers-by as they dodged in panic. It was noisy for a while. However, the source of this chaos had quietly left the town. Looking back at the town entrance that had entered a state of alert, David scratched his head and said helplessly, Boss, you acted too quickly. We didn't even have time to go in. David could not be blamed for complaining. According to the original plan, 5 minutes after Tang In entered the hotel, David and the others would sneak in and secretly move out the information of the Bounty Hunter Guild. However, in less than 3 minutes, Tang In rushed out and killed the owner of the hotel on the street. Tisk, I didn't want to do it. Tang In grinned and grabbed his long silver hair. He was speechless. There were thousands of wanted people in this strange world. Tang In still could not understand why the Bounty Hunter Guild wanted to kill Yema as soon as they saw him. They even skipped the process of asking for instructions from their superiors. They did not have any professional ethics at all. This was undoubtedly abnormal. Not to mention the Bounty Hunter Guild. Even the official Thieves Guild only secretly informed the Temple of Light when they saw the highest level wanted person, Tang In. They did not choose to take action on the spot. Could it be that Yema had a deep conflict with this Bounty Hunter Guild? This should not be the case. If this was the case, they would have known Yema's strength. They would have hesitated and weighed the pros and cons. David and the others could not figure out the reason after listening to the situation just now. After a while, they spread their hands and asked, Boss, what should we do now? Find the nearest Bounty Hunter Guild. Tang In put on his long silver hair again. Damn it, let's try again. For the whole night, Tang In ran around with a gray space. When he returned to Hansui City in the morning, his face was gloomy. Including Fallenwood Town, they went to a total of 4 low-level bounty hunter guilds. Without exception, as long as Tang In went in disguised as Yema, he would be surrounded and killed. In the end, when they were in a small city, they even alarmed the church in the city. It took them a lot of effort to successfully escape. It didn't matter if he was besieged. Tang In was used to this kind of treatment. But there had to be a reason, right? What was the meaning of this? Why did he try to kill them without even asking them what was going on? Of course, this trip wasn't completely fruitless. In the end, Tang In learned his lesson. He ordered David and the others to sneak in to steal the information, and then he would go in to test the waters. This way, although the outcome did not change, at least they had obtained some information from the Bounty Hunter Guild. However, this information didn't bring any surprises. After entering it into the system, he found that it was basically all transaction content. There wasn't much value. Unfavorable start. After entering Frostwater City, Tang In thought for a moment before turning around and asking, apart from these low-level guilds, does the secret organization have any guild addresses in major cities? David was taken aback. There should be. Boss, are you thinking of... That's right, let's do something big. Tang Yin narrowed his long and narrow eyes. After being beaten up for no reason, and all the information he obtained was worthless, he became ruthless. Go back and ask. Send me the addresses as soon as possible. I don't believe that I can't find what I want. After returning to the secret organization's contact point, Tang Yin rested for a while. Before he received any news from David, he first received news from Lena that the telescope was successfully manufactured. The southern part of the city was near the Frostwater River. This was the gathering place of various craftsmen in the city. Probably because it was convenient to get water, there were textile factories, tailors, blacksmiths, tool workshops, and so on. In the circular field of vision, a few workshop apprentices were struggling to carry water on the shore. Clear water overflowed from the shaky buckets from time to time. Not far away, there was a flat dock for collective laundry. Most of them were aunties, but there were also a few young women in simple clothes. They raised their hands to wipe the sweat from their foreheads. The clothes on their backs had long been stuck to them because of the sweat, slightly revealing their graceful figures. This is the first finished product of the telescope. The effective observation range is about 200 meters. On the roof, Lena stood beside Tang In and introduced, if there are better materials, such as freshwater meteorites, blue magic crystals, and so on, the effect should be better. Roland waved his hand. You are an alchemist. You could do whatever you want. I have no opinion. TSK, nice figure. Muttering in a low voice, Tang In raised his eyebrows slightly and reluctantly put down the telescope. What? Nothing. This place should be more than 200 meters away from the river. Touching his nose, Tang In looked away and skillfully changed the topic. Lena did not suspect anything. She pointed to the body of the telescope and explained with a smile, I added something inside. A rune stone engraved with eagle-eye magic. Now the effective observation range is about 800 meters. Tang In was surprised. You also know magic? No, but this does not prevent me from using their functions. Lena smiled and spread out her hands. You know, an alchemist has to know a little bit about everything. So, this is called professionalism. Tang In nodded in appreciation and could not help but sigh. After all, the other world was different from the modern world. There was no complete scientific system here, but similarly, there were all kinds of strange alchemy magic here. It was also a field that the modern world did not touch. It was hard to say which one was stronger and which one was weaker. Just from his telescope, it was indeed unique. With a thumbs up, Tang In sincerely said, Lena, thank you. Lena was obviously not used to Tang In's formal gratitude. She first hurriedly waved her hand, then raised her hand to tuck her long hair behind her ear. She lowered her eyes slightly. Actually, I didn't do anything. If it weren't for Mr. Arthur's creativity, I wouldn't have known that just two slightly curved pieces of ordinary crystal have such a magical effect. Haha, no need to be modest. I know my own ability. I'm just saying. Shaking his head and mocking himself, Tang In subconsciously wanted to pat Lena's shoulder to express his gratitude, but he suddenly thought that it was inappropriate. He retracted his hand and scratched his head. Don't call me Mr. Arthur anymore. It sounds weird. Just call me Tang In. Lena playfully winked. Okay, Mr. Arthur. Tang In touched his forehead and helplessly shook his head. Naughty. Ha! Defeating Tang In and taking back this title seemed to give Lena a sense of accomplishment. She covered her mouth and chuckled a few times. Then, her expression became serious. The telescope is not a big problem. It can be mass-produced with a little improvement. But I'm afraid that the weapon will have to wait for a while. The blueprint is too complicated. I've never come into contact with this before. I need some time to study it. Tang In waved his hand indifferently. It's okay, Before he finished speaking, a rough voice suddenly came from below. Boss. Lowering his head, he saw that David had come to the house with a thin piece of paper and was walking over. Obviously, the information about the Bounty Hunter Guild that he had previously inquired about had taken shape. Sorry. Turning his head, Tang In smiled apologetically at Lena. It's okay. You go ahead with your work. I'll send someone to inform you when there's progress. Tang In nodded and handed the telescope back. He took a few steps forward and lightly jumped down from the roof to David. He asked directly, "Any news?" "Yes." David did not talk nonsense and directly handed over the thin paper. "All the addresses that the secret agency knows are here. If there's no suitable target, give them some time and they'll continue to look." After taking the paper, Tang In glanced at it and saw Hansui City first. There was no doubt that it would be much more convenient to make a move here. However, this was where they were now, so it was naturally not appropriate to cause any trouble. Therefore, it was the first place that Tang In ruled out. Mountain Creek City? Ha! Raising his eyebrows, Tang In saw the familiar name of the city and could not help but laugh. He was familiar with Mountain Creek City. It was the headquarters of the secret agency. Moreover, he had once caused quite a commotion there and directly toppled the statue of the Mountain Creek goddess that symbolized the holy city in the north. He thought for a moment. That's it, Mountain Creek City. Go back and prepare. We'll leave tonight. Okay. Tang In turned his head and waved at Lena, who was still on the roof, and then left with David. Lena also waved back. She paused, raised the telescope, and narrowed her eyes. Tang In's departing figure was instantly reflected clearly in her eyes, as if it was within reach. However, this time was very short. After Tang In turned into the corner of the street, he disappeared. Pursing her lips, Lena slowly put down the telescope. She was in a daze, and the light smile at the corner of her mouth had long disappeared. "Mr. Arthur, you don't have to thank me. What I want more is for you to casually pat me on the shoulder and tease me a little, just like you did in the backyard of the two-story building in Lion City this afternoon. Mr. Arthur, forgive me for being willful, because this is a title that belongs to me and only me." Chapter 726. 3 days later, at noon, in Mountain Creek City, a few ordinary carriages passed a rough inspection by the guards, paid the entrance fee, and slowly drove into the city. As soon as they left the city gate, a fat man dressed like a merchant in the first carriage grimaced and rambled. F*CK. It's so F*King Shady. They charged us 20 copper coins per person. Isn't it 10 copper coins to enter the city? This is corruption, blatant corruption. I'm going to sue them. Forget it. The middle-aged man, sitting inside, couldn't stand the noise and waved his hand to interrupt him. Based on what I've done here in the past, it's really not a loss to give them this small amount of money. Needless to say, these two people were naturally Tang In and Harry. Luke hadn't returned from sending Josiah off. Now, only David, Harry, and the other second-stage members of the Gray Space were with Tang In. Harry lived up to his appearance as a profiteer. It wasn't that he hadn't seen a lot of money before, but he still felt the pain of losing dozens of copper coins, and it was sincere. He muttered a few more words unwillingly and finally recovered. He raised his head and asked, "Boss, should we send someone to contact the brothers in the secret agency in the city?" As mentioned before, Mountain Creek City was the former headquarters of the secret agency. In fact, it was precisely because of this that the Bounty Hunters Guild here was so easy to find. After all, Josiah and the other higher-ups had been here before. Naturally, they had to investigate the forces in the city to ensure their safety. Tang In shook his head slightly. "No need. It's just a small matter. There's no need to mobilize so many people." Harry's mouth twitched when he heard that. The Bounty Hunters Guild. Mountain Creek City was known as the Holy City of the North. The guild here definitely wasn't small. Even someone like him couldn't help but feel a little uneasy. After all, not all the members of the Gray Space had come this time. But from Tang In's mouth, it was actually just a small matter. Exhaling, Harry shook his head and could only think, "Fine, the boss is the boss." This boldness is indeed difficult for ordinary people to match. Right, where's the guild's specific address? Harry replied without hesitation. In the East District. The East District? Tang In was stunned. The noble area? Yes, it's in a baron's manor. According to the information, this baron is also a member of the Bounty Hunter Guild. TSK, this Bounty Hunter Guild is really grand. Tang could not help but raise his head and sigh as he thought about how the stronghold was built next to the police station and moved directly into the manor of the nobles this time around. Learn from them. Learn from them. Look at his wealth. It's simply amazing. Harry also nodded in agreement. Not to mention other things, just this courage and unexpected thinking was enough to amaze people. Thinking of something, Tang indecisively said, "No, we can't lose our momentum. Let's find a hotel closest to the police station. We'll stay there for the night." Huh? Harry could not help but be stunned when he heard that. He did not have the time to think about the relationship between living next to the police station and Aura. He asked in confusion, "Boss, are we not going to the noble's manor to check it out first?" "Scout? Why, we're good citizens." After asking in return, Tang waved his hand carelessly. "If there's any trouble, find the police station. This is what good citizens like us should do." He paused and patted Harry's shoulder. "When we check into the hotel later, send the Bounty Hunter Guild's address to the police station." Harry nodded subconsciously at first, then opened his mouth and was dumbfounded. It turned out that after all this fuss and putting on such a bold front, in the end, they were planning to kill with a borrowed knife. After a while, Harry came back to his senses and scratched his head. "But boss, the Bounty Hunter Guild is not to be trifled with. Are you sure the police station has the guts?" "Of course." Tang narrowed his long and narrow eyes. The corners of his mouth curled up into a strange smile. He said firmly, "I can't say for other cities, but the police station here definitely has the guts." Bose had been having a good time recently, but then he felt a little depressed. This was not a bad sentence, nor was it contradictory. If it was any other police chief, staying in a city with a strong religious atmosphere and a low crime rate, they would definitely be able to sit back and relax. But Bose was not like that. After not arresting and killing assassins for several days, his whole body was itching, and his mood was extremely bad. As a matter of fact, a few officers from the police station were being scolded out by him. "Get out. All of you King, get out. If you don't have enough funds, go apply for it yourself. You've already written the report. Can't you forge my signature? You're bothering me with such a small matter. Get out." The officers jumped out of the office in embarrassment amidst the chaotic cursing. They looked at each other and could not help but shake their heads and smile bitterly. Let them forge his signature? Only he could think of that. But with such an outrageous boss, what else could they say? At this moment, a figure in armor came up the stairs and looked at the officers who were wiping their sweat. He could not help but raise his eyebrows. "What's the matter, everyone? Sir Chief Bugnes?" A few administrative officials looked up and hurriedly went forward to salute. At the same time, they secretly sighed in relief. This person's temper was much better than the one in the room. Bugnes finally understood the situation amidst the chatter of the officers. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and felt a little helpless. Finally, he spread his hands and said, "Sir, where are your application reports? I'll bring them in for you." "That would be great. Sorry to trouble you, Sir Chief." The officers did not bother to be polite and quickly stuffed the reports into Bugnes' hands. They bowed and thanked him profusely as they quickly retreated to the stairs, as if they were afraid that Bugnes would go back on his word. Shaking his head, Bugnes pushed open the door of the chief's office. Just as he walked in, he raised his right hand and instantly caught the heavy book that was thrown at him. Bose, who was sitting on the desk with his legs crossed, looked up and said weakly, "It's you, Bugnes. You better give me some good news, like where are the assassins in the city, or else I'll really go crazy." "Unfortunately, as far as I know, except for the ones you sent to the gallows, the rest of the assassins in the city basically went to other cities. Now, not to mention the prison, even the door of the Thieves' Union is rarely set foot in." While saying these words, Bugnes walked to the desk and threw the heavy book and the reports over. "Sign it, Without funds, we can't pay our brother's salaries. Oh, Bose covered his face and fell back into his chair. He let out a long sigh and pushed the reports to the side of the table with his left foot. There was already a thick pile of documents there. He said dejectedly, "I regret it, Bugnes. I shouldn't have chosen to come here in the first place. Now I can almost smell the rust on my body. Believe me, that's only because you haven't bathed for a few weeks." He picked up the water bottle and shook it. It was empty. Bugnes put it down helplessly and couldn't help but sigh. But these days are really boring. Bose rolled his eyes and became more energetic. "Why don't we transfer to another place? Anyway, I can't stay in this damn place anymore." "Easy for you to say." Bugnes shook his head without thinking. "Our shortest term is 3 years. The higher-ups won't approve." "That's none of my business." Hee hee. "Why don't we cause some trouble and find an excuse to beat up a few nobles? Then we'll naturally be transferred." Bose was really desperate to come up with such an idea. However, Bugnes shook his head again. "Not a bad idea, but have you thought about which city would dare to let us go?" Stunned, Bose rubbed his red nose and roared helplessly. "F***, this is driving me crazy." Just as he finished speaking, a horseman knocked on the wooden door timidly, his expression extremely nervous. "Are you blind? The door is open and you don't know how to come in," Bose said angrily as he turned his body sideways. "If you have something to say it quickly." The soldier heard this and quickly handed over the ball of paper in his hand. "Director, someone at the door asked me to give this to you. He said it's an old friend of yours." "Since when did I have an old friend?" Bugnes interrupted. "Take a look. Maybe it's true. What's there to see?" As he muttered to himself, Bose unfolded the paper ball and scanned through it. His gaze immediately froze. Boom! His body leaned forward, and the half-suspended wooden chair instantly fell back to the ground. He threw his head back and laughed heartily. "Haha, business has arrived." Chapter 727. In the hotel facing the street, the curtains on one side of the room were slightly lifted, revealing a gap. As far as the eye could see, it happened to be the main entrance of the police station on the right side of the street. At this time, the iron gate of the police station was completely open, and a large group of cavalry was coming in from the outside, majestic and full of momentum. "TSK, this is the 3rd batch of cavalry back." Smacking his lips, Harry turned his head and sighed. "Boss, you're right. The police station here is indeed very brave." "Correct me." In the middle of the room, Tang In sat on a soft chair and flipped through the recent newspaper. He said without raising his head, "To be precise, the police chief here is very brave." Harry raised his eyebrows. "Boss, you know him?" "Yes, an old acquaintance." "You have also dealt with him before, Bose. Do you still remember?" "Bose. It's him." Of course, the gray space and Bose knew each other. When Josiah came to the city for the first time on behalf of the Gray Coat Army for publicity, Tang and brought the gray space with him to protect him. The police chief of the city was Bose. The two sides even fought, and in the end, Tang sent Bose and Bugnes to the treatment center. Of course, in addition to this, Bose's encirclement of the Dusk Hunter group also caused a great sensation in Bran. It was not too much of an exaggeration to say that he was famous all over the world. Thinking about this person's life story, Harry also nodded and said in realization, "No wonder. So that's how it is." Then he frowned. "But boss, although Bose's strength is not bad, can the police station destroy the Bounty Hunter Guild?" Casually throwing away the newspaper, Tang shook his head and said, "Don't underestimate Bose. With his style of doing things, it is a miracle that he is still alive. This is not just a matter of strength. The most important thing is that this person seems to be reckless and violent, but his mind is absolutely sharp. His ability to judge the situation and size up the situation is also first class. He knows the strength of the Bounty Hunter Guild, so this encirclement operation will not only have the garrison cavalry. I believe that the garrison forces of Mountain Stream City will also be mobilized." He paused for a second and continued, "Of course, these are only the forces on the surface. The more important thing is that he has the brand behind him. He was good, and the Bounty Hunter Guild was evil. Once the guild's location was exposed, the bounty hunters would not be stupid enough to go against him. Instead, they would choose to escape. Therefore, his enemies this time are only members of the Bounty Hunter Guild. His chances of winning are very high. Harry could not help but nod in understanding. That was the logic. Although the Bounty Hunter Guild and the Grey Coat Army were not tolerated by Bran, there was still a huge difference between the two. The Grey Coat Army was a force to be reckoned with. Going against the Bran was their mission. However, the Bounty Hunter Guild was different. They were only a secret organization. Profit was their #1 priority. Although they were also at odds with the Bran, the nature of the organization determined that when faced with a direct force like the garrison, they would only think of hiding. They were a little afraid, but most of the time, they felt that it was not worth it. After all, it was only for profit. Anyway, they could not win. If they were discovered, they could just hide. There was no need to fight to the death. There's nothing to see. We've been on the road for a few days. Let everyone have a good rest. Tang crossed his arms in front of his chest and closed his eyes. If I'm not wrong, Bose will only take action in the middle of the night. There's no rush across the street at the garrison. Leave only a team of cavalry to maintain the traffic in the city. Call the rest back. Also, the garrison is now only allowed to enter and not leave. If anyone leaks the news, don't blame me for personally sending him to the gallows. You, go and contact Old Lay from the garrison. Tell him that I have a bottle of good wine. He can come if he wants. Unlike his previous half-dead appearance, Bose was wearing a full set of armor. He held a heavy sword in his hand and constantly issued orders. He was abnormally excited. After everyone left the room, the Bugnes walked in with a long spear. I've investigated. There is indeed a problem with the Baron's manor. Well, do you really want to make a move on the Bounty Hunter Guild? Don't you want to consider it more? Consider my ass. Bose licked his lips and waved the heavy sword in his hand. After holding in for so long, my sword is thirsty. I can understand your feelings, but the Bugnes spread out his hands. Bounty hunters are not like assassins. They have some life in their hands. Even if we get the garrison soldiers, we will have to pay a high price to completely take them down this time. Well, I heard that the previous chief of the garrison was defeated by a bounty hunter. Bose waved his hand indifferently. It's okay. When the time comes, we'll first send a few rounds of arrow rain, and then we'll open a weak opening for them. 5 minutes. If they can escape, it's their luck. If they can't blame me. It's good that you can think of this. The Bugnes only wanted to remind his overly excited partner. Now that he saw that his partner was still clear-headed, he nodded and said no more. After a pause, he frowned slightly. Then there's only one question left. Who sent the message to us? What's their purpose? Bose had obviously considered this question, but he was unusually straightforward. He simply waved his hand. There's no need to think too much. There are too many possibilities. It's useless to just guess. As long as we don't leave any loopholes tonight, it doesn't matter what they're planning. That's true. Well, tonight? Yes, we can't hide it for long with such a large-scale mobilization of manpower. Since that's the case, why don't we take advantage of the fact that they're suspicious and kill them directly? The idea is good, but the East District is a noble district after all. Should we inform them first? No, what if the news is leaked? Bose rejected without thinking. Then, his single eye squinted, revealing a sly look. If we succeed this time, we can have a good time. If we don't, with our previous contributions, we'll at most be transferred out of here. It'll be a good change of environment. Haha, I'm such a genius. Since he had already said this much, Bernie naturally shrugged indifferently. The body of his spear trembled slightly, revealing its sharpness. That's fine too. After being silent for so long, let's turn the world upside down again. Late at night, East District, the nobles' nightlife was quite rich. As long as they were willing, they could participate in small gatherings or large banquets almost every night. Of course, in order to maintain this relaxed and happy atmosphere, safety was naturally the most important. In addition to the guards and the nobles' manors and castles, the East District was also surrounded by layers of defense. There were no less than 3 brigades of garrison cavalry patrolling the area day and night. However, as the saying goes, virtue is 1 foot high, while the devil is 10 feet high. No matter how strict the defenses were, there would always be loopholes to be found. The Bounty Hunter Guild had set up their stronghold here with the intention of testing the strength of the hunters. After all, if they couldn't even break through these defenses, then wanting to become a bounty hunter would undoubtedly be a joke. Or, just from this point alone, it could be seen that the strength of a bounty hunter was much stronger than that of a thief or an assassin. At this moment, at the main entrance of the East District, under the cover of the night, cavalry and soldiers wearing all kinds of armor continuously surged in. They must have received orders in advance. Although the scale of their numbers was huge, they didn't make any loud noises when they moved. From afar, it looked like a black torrent silently surging. The East District was still peaceful. For the time being, no one had discovered the silent influx of this force, except for the dozens of figures hiding in the forest and horse farm in the distance. Boss, you're God. They actually made their moves so quickly. Bootlicker, F***CK. David, you. That's enough, quiet. After making a shushing gesture to David and Harry, Tang narrowed his eyes and looked at the crowd in the distance. It stretched endlessly, and he couldn't estimate how many people came. He couldn't help but sigh. What a big move, Bose. Bose is still Bose after all. David saw this and also clicked his tongue. This is a F***king complete suppression. Does he want to wipe out the Bounty Hunter Guild in one fell swoop? Not to that extent. Tang shook his head. If it was an open field, the bounty hunters would definitely die. But after all, there is still room to maneuver here. After a pause, he glanced at the few figures lying on the grass next to him. They were the long-term sentries left by the Bounty Hunter Guild, but they had already been taken care of by Tang, and the others. Well, these soldiers will definitely be discovered if they go forward for a while. By then, some bounty hunters should be able to escape. But it's like getting caught in a trap of one's own making. This is the aristocrats' area, and the security is the tightest. When the chaos breaks out, the aristocrats' private soldiers will have to come out and sweep the area. At most, only a few people will be able to escape. As soon as he finished speaking, Tang suddenly turned his head and looked in the direction of the barren manor. The bright lights just now fell into endless darkness in an instant. Oh, have they discovered? Chapter 728. Baron was the lowest rank among the official nobles other than lords. Hence, the manor of the target this time was naturally at the edge of this noble district. Just as the lights were extinguished, a deafening roar broke the silence of the night sky. Quick, quick, surround me. Like a huge rock smashing into a pool of stagnant water, the quietly advancing soldiers no longer concealed themselves. They charged forward violently like a flood that had broken through a dam. Even faster was the flood of cavalry that surrounded them from all directions. The sound of hooves converged in one place, like the sound of drums on the battlefield. Then, the sound of weapons being unsheathed sounded almost simultaneously. It was ear-piercing and sharp, instantly breaking the silence of the night sky. Bang! Without waiting for the cavalry to get close, the gates of the noble's manor slammed shut. Then whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Waves of sharp whistling sounds broke through the air, and the cavalry closest to the manor fell instantly. Screams of pain and hoarse neighs could be heard incessantly. Large crossbows. Damn it. Spread out, spread out. This was the voice of the head of the cavalry, Bugnes. They had underestimated the defensive strength of the Bounty Hunter Guild. They did not expect this small manor to have a city defense weapon hidden in it. Caught off guard, the cavalry at the front suffered heavy casualties. But that was it. As the cavalry spread out and the loading time of the large crossbows was too long, the next 2 rounds of attacks did not achieve any glorious results. Bastard, F***ck your mother, playing this game with me. Bose at the back was leading a large group of soldiers to surround them. Seeing this, he was enraged. He waved his heavy sword and roared violently. "Shoot! Suppress them for me." Just as he finished his roar, whoosh, 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 densely packed sparks instantly appeared in the sky, like a sky full of stars. It was a spectacular sight. Then, the sparks fell, whistling as they rushed into the manor with the sound of death. Since he had confirmed that there was something wrong with the manor, Bose naturally would not hold back. He was clear of the advantages of his side. Compared to the undisciplined bounty hunters, the soldiers and cavalry were much more disciplined and were more suitable for a frontal battle. Of course, the disadvantage was also obvious, and that was that they were completely at a disadvantage in individual combat. Therefore, it was not strange that Bose had set fire to the manor. This was to trap the enemy in place as much as possible so that they could only passively take a beating. It's King spectacular, just like fireworks. David, who was standing by the forest, couldn't help but look up in a daze as he exclaimed with a slightly artistic tone. Harry, who was standing at the side, did not make any sarcastic remarks. Just like the other members of the Gray Space, he was also impressed by this magnificent scene and was momentarily speechless. Tang only glanced at it and then retracted his gaze. His expression was calm. He wasn't being pretentious. He was someone who had seen grand spectacles before. For example, the fireworks he had directed and acted out in the Northern Wilderness Imperial City was much more spectacular than this. Looking around, the nobles' manors far and near must have seen this scene, but they did not do anything for a while. They must have been scared stiff. As for the Baron's manor, as expected, some people had already begun to break out. However, these people were obviously not smart enough. Now that the arrows had not stopped, they would end up like hedgehogs if they came out. After more than 10 rounds of arrows, the noble's manor fell into a sea of fire. It was hard to say how many bounty hunters had died inside, but the defensive forces on the surrounding walls had undoubtedly been completely destroyed. As soon as the arrows stopped, the surrounding soldiers had already pressed forward layer by layer, not giving the people inside any chance to breathe. Tangan couldn't help but frown when he saw this. He muttered softly, "They're going all out." There was no need to mention the strength of the bounty hunters. They were probably the weakest, and a dozen or so soldiers would not be able to get close to them. Therefore, Bose's current move was really not smart. According to Tangan's previous thoughts, Bose should have left some gaps after the initial fierce attack, adopting a strategy of surrounding 3 and leaving 1 behind. Although this would let some bounty hunters escape, it would also be the fastest way to secure victory. In fact, Bose had planned to do so before. However, after seeing his subordinates' garrison cavalry being skewered like a gourd by the large crossbows, his temper suddenly flared up. He would rather win a Pyrrhic victory than to uproot the bounty hunter guild and wipe out everyone inside on the spot. Bose's determination was undoubtedly noticed by the people inside. Before the soldiers could completely surround them, hundreds of ghostly figures instantly charged out, shining brightly. Very obviously, these should be the bounty hunters who came to the guild today. Of course, they were unlucky. Now, they could only take advantage of the fact that the encirclement had not been completely formed and there was still some hope of escaping. They could only brace themselves and force their way out. All of this made Tang a little absent-minded. It was a very familiar rhythm. Back in Lian City, there was a similar scene. Bose was still taking the initiative to surround and suppress one side. The difference was that he used to be an assassin, but now he was a bounty hunter. Oh, there was still a little difference. Just as these strong bounty hunters were about to force their way out, the garrison cavalry that was pressing forward paused in unison. They took out something from behind their shields, held it horizontally, and aimed. Puff, puff, puff. Compared to the effect of the arrows before, the sound of the arrows breaking through the air this time was shorter and sharper. Almost half of the hundreds of figures instantly fell. There were also some who were not completely dead. They rolled a few times on the ground, howling miserably. Then, they were immediately extinguished by the sound of the arrows breaking through the air. F***CK. It can't be crossbows. There is a need to explain here that bows and arrows and crossbows were 2 different concepts. If one used bows and arrows to kill people, one would be praised for their archery skills. But if one used crossbows to kill people, it would generally give people a wretched feeling. It was probably because the range of a crossbow was too short and too quick. It was actually the best weapon to laugh from the front and attack from the back. No matter if it was because of this reason or not, there were very few crossbows in the market. It was considered a prohibited item in the general sense. Other than the army, other groups were not allowed to possess crossbows on the surface. But right now, these garrison cavalry openly took out their crossbows and fired in unison. It really made David and the others speechless. So this is bows. Tangan did not look surprised. He only sighed with a tone of confirmation. He understood bows. For a guy who dared to turn the muzzle of Mjolnir to fire at the city, what was the big deal about equipping his subordinates with crossbows? After a pause, Tangan was the first to withdraw his gaze. All right, the Bounty Hunter Guild is finished. Let's get ready to move. Remember, our goal is to intercept the various information that the cavalry is transporting out. Of course, it would be best if we could capture that Baron alive. This was also Tangan's goal. Who cares about bows and the Bounty Hunter Guild? Even if the two of them died together, it would have nothing to do with Tangan. At most, it would just be a few claps of his hands to celebrate. His goal was the guild's information. In this way, snatching it from the cavalry was undoubtedly much easier than stealing it from the Bounty Hunter Guild. David, Harry, and the others heard this and nodded together. They were about to walk out of the forest and approach the road to find the best place to rob later. But at this moment, Tangan suddenly raised his head. His expression changed, and he hurriedly said, "Get down." The members of the Gray Space certainly had absolute trust in Tangan. Although they did not understand what was going on, they still immediately got down on the ground and subconsciously rolled behind the tree next to them. At this time, everyone's eyes suddenly lit up. A light spot appeared out of thin air above the manor. At first glance, it was not eye-catching, just like one of the stars in the sky. But in just a short moment, the light spot rapidly expanded like the rising sun. In an instant, it was as big as a silver plate, sprinkling thousands of rays of light. The battlefield was silent. Bows, the garrison cavalry, the garrison soldiers, the bounty hunters, the people inside the manor, everyone couldn't help but stop what they were doing at this moment. They stared blankly at the constantly expanding disk in the sky. They watched as it continued to expand and expand. Suddenly, whoosh, the light disk fell rapidly, shaking the space and making a strange sound like cold water being poured on charcoal. It dragged a long white shadow, which looked like a silver cylinder, and fell rapidly into the center of the manor like a comet falling to the ground. Boom! 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 The white light soared into the sky, and the earth trembled. The air waves surged and churned like a demon with its bloody mouth wide open, constantly devouring everything that it could cover. Even the raging fire from before was directly suppressed, disappearing without a trace in the blink of an eye. David subconsciously opened his mouth, and his expression was blank. Wow, what a big firework, light magic. Tangan looked at the scene in front of him and was a little stunned. Bose has such power? At the same time, Bose, who was in the middle of the crowd, blinked his only eye and scratched his head. He turned his head and asked in a very uncertain tone, "That before did I call the people from the Temple of Light?" Chapter 729. Plans could never keep up with changes. Bose was like that, and so was Tangan. When the terrifying light magic fell from the sky, the Bounty Hunter Guild was undoubtedly finished, and Tangan's plan to reap the benefits of the fishermen had to be aborted. That was indeed the case. The dust had not completely dispersed, and they could already see that the original noble's manor had now turned into a huge crater and ruins. Not to mention the fragile guild documents. Even the Baron should be dead for sure. After a few breaths of silence, the bounty hunters who had rushed out earlier once again fought with the soldiers outside. But now, everyone could see that they were just struggling at death's door. Without the restraint of the guild's power, it was impossible for these bounty hunters to escape with only half of their casualties. Moreover, After the descent of light magic, the surrounding nobles' private soldiers gradually gathered their courage and surrounded them. A moment later, outside the nobles' area, Harry hurriedly returned with a few people with a gloomy expression. "Boss, it's the mages from the Temple of Light. 5 of them came, and they're all experts. I heard that they were originally guarding the Mountain Creek goddess statue, but they rushed over when they sensed the commotion here." David hammered his palm and looked angry. F***CK, what the hell? Why did they have to come at this time to interfere? Sigh. Harry also sighed helplessly. He did not know what to say, because this matter more or less had something to do with Boss Tang, and just by looking at the terrifying power of the light magic just now, one could tell that it was not something an ordinary person could cast. At least, the clergymen in the original church in the city did not have such strength. Previously, when Tang, An, and Eunice fought, they had inadvertently destroyed the Mountain Creek goddess statue, which was also the statue of the Holy Maiden of Light. The Temple of Light attached great importance to this statue and specially transferred a team of experts from the Guild of Light to guard it. That was how the 5 light mages came to be. Don't you think that these light mages are a little, well, overzealous? When Tangen heard that, he did not feel annoyed that he had shot himself in the foot. Instead, he frowned and said thoughtfully. Harry was stunned. Boss, you mean? It's just a guess. It feels a little strange." In Tang An's impression, the people of the Temple of Light were not all saints. Their eagerness to come and help, as if they were living lei feng, really made him feel awkward and strange. Of course, this could also be due to his preconceived notions. After all, Tang never had a good impression of the Temple of Light. After thinking for a while, he said in a deep voice, "Let's go back first. Also, Harry, inform the secret organization in the city that I want all the information about the Bounty Hunter Guild." Yes. In the end, Tang decided to stay in Mountain Stream City. That night, there was quite a commotion in the eastern part of the city. However, it was mainly caused by the nobles who were against bows for privately mobilizing soldiers. However, with the police station producing evidence regarding the Bounty Hunter Guild and the intervention of the Temple of Light, the matter was left unsettled in the end. This result made Bose very disappointed. After being busy, he did not have a good time and was not successfully transferred out of Mountain Stream City. He could not help but complain. Of course, this matter had little to do with Tang Yin, and he was not interested in meeting Bose again. 3 days later, the secret organization sent the information about the Bounty Hunter Guild, along with a piece of news that surprised Tang Yin. "Jack, are you sure it's Jack?" Looking at the secret organization personnel in front of him, Tang Yin was stunned and asked again to confirm. He nodded. "Yes, sir. A few days ago, Mr. Jack was looking for you through the Brother organization. After we received the news that you were in the city, we sent someone to confirm it. If there is no delay, I believe you'll be able to see Mr. Jack today." "Oh, thank you. You may leave first." "Yes, sir." Tang Yin took the information and returned to the room. He could not help but have some doubts in his heart. Strange, didn't Jack say he was going to return to the south? Why did he suddenly think of me? After thinking about it, Tang Yin wasted time guessing. After all, he would see Jack in the afternoon. It would not be too late to ask then. He closed the door of the hotel room, entered the information into the system, and then entered the space. It had to be said that with the system, Tang Yin became a little lazy. As long as the information was entered into the system, all the information in it would be instantly sorted out and summarized. As long as he was willing, creating a rigorous data table was just a matter of thought. In this way, who would spend a lot of effort to sort it out themselves? The scene in front of him changed instantly. As soon as he stepped into the space, the system's synthesized voice suddenly sounded in his ears. Ding! The system's long-term task: establish an assassin organization. It was such a lonely sentence, but Tang Yin could not help but be taken aback. Another long-winded one. Good luck, congratulations. Not far away, the old butler raised the teacup in his hand and said so. Taking a breath, Tang Yin shook his head and said with some doubts, "Isn't there already a gray space? That's just a team of assassins, not an assassin organization." The old butler explained, The former needs to be attached to a certain force. The latter is completely independent and belongs only to you. Tang laughed. Hee hee, I didn't expect the system to be so sensitive. I just had the idea and the task came. I've said it before, the system serves the host as its first customer. Nodding, Tang did not hesitate anymore. He pulled out the light screen and called up the information just now. Search for keywords, Temple of Light. Search for keywords, clergy. Search for keywords, light. He kept searching, but the feedback made Tang a little disappointed. In the end, he could only shorten the keywords and expand the search range. The old butler walked over slowly, looked at Tang's actions, and asked calmly, "You suspect that there is a connection between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild?" "Yes, I keep feeling that something is wrong." Tang did not deny it. His eyes turned and quickly scanned the various information on the light screen. Tang had never been afraid to speculate with the most vicious thoughts, let alone the Temple of Light, which he did not have a good impression of. The 5 light mages that suddenly appeared that night, although there was a sufficient excuse, there was nothing suspicious. But Tang still wanted to investigate, of course. It was just a simple investigation. Even Tang himself had to admit that this suspicion was somewhat unreasonable. After all, the Temple of Light had always been a benevolent image. Although Tang did not agree with this, the contrast between them and the dirty and vicious Bounty Hunter Guild was too great, so great that it was unacceptable. The old butler shook his head. "There's no need to look. There won't be any results." "Oh, you also think that this idea is a little unreliable?" "No. Justice, evil, kindness, ugliness. These are all boring things. I'm just saying that there's something wrong with your method." The old butler looked calm. "I'm not belittling the ability of secret organizations, but if the Temple of Light is really related to the Bounty Hunter Guild, do you think that with the power of the Temple of Light after hundreds of years, this relationship can't be covered up?" Tang was stunned when he heard this. He stopped his futile search and thought, that makes sense. Well, so should I target some of the big shots of the Temple of Light? They should know something. After a pause, he shook his head. Maybe there's no need to do this. Let me think. TSK, since the 5 mages were eager to destroy the Bounty Hunter Guild, it means that there is something that cannot be exposed. It seems that it's necessary to pay a visit to these mages. The old butler said non-committally, maybe they just received a simple order from above. It doesn't matter. If that's the case, even if we can't get any useful information, at least it proves that the two are indeed related, right? At this point, Tang could not help but grin. I don't know why, but I seem to be a little excited now. It's like, well, painting a beautiful portrait, tearing down a magnificent palace. The pleasure of destruction. It seems that I'm really an out-and-out evil person. The old butler spread his hands and said indifferently, "Who isn't?" Chapter 730. Afternoon, at the entrance of the hotel. Arthur. I can tell it's you at a glance. No matter how you disguise yourself, you can't hide your wretched temperament. Same to you. Didn't you go back to the south? I heard something happened, so I came back to see if you were dead or not. Don't worry about that. You took a stroll in hell. I'm still alive and well. Under the shocked gazes of passers-by, the 2 men hugged each other at the entrance of the hotel. If one ignored the unique way of greeting, as well as the posture of deliberately hammering through each other's back, this scene was very touching. Needless to say, these 2 people were naturally Tang and Jack. To be able to see Jack again, Tang was very happy. Without a doubt, this was a bad friend, but also a bad friend that could not be disliked. After teasing each other for a while, Tang shook his head and laughed. "Okay, let's get down to business. Why did you specially come to find me this time? Hey, I know you're very busy. You have to save thousands of people at any time. TSK, I came all the way here to help you." Jack curled his lips in disdain, then suddenly took a few steps back, waved his hand, and pointed at the man in a black robe who was covered from head to toe. He winked and said, "Hey, let me introduce you. This is Raymond, who specializes in slandering the Temple of Light for more than 10 years. Raymond, a former teacher of Dawn Civilian Academy. However, before he could even attend a single class, he was hunted down by the people from the Temple of Light. He even implicated Jack and little Carol back then and had to flee with him for several months. Author's note: it's mentioned around chapter 456. He, Tanuki's nickname of Crater-Filling Maniac, is not for nothing. Knowing the other's identity, there were now 3 wanted criminals in the open and in the dark at the entrance of the hotel. Although Tang did not know why Jack brought Raymond here, it was clear that the entrance of the hotel was not a place to talk, so he invited the two into the hotel. Walking into the room, Raymond took the initiative to take off his mask and other concealment, revealing a slightly artistic flaxen curly hair. This was a middle-aged man with a bitter face and a thin figure. Tang sized Redmond up and had a first impression of him. Redmond was probably a stubborn fellow who couldn't change his mind once he set his mind on something. As the middleman, Jack was naturally responsible for adjusting the atmosphere. He introduced the two of them, the Gray Coat Army, Tang, the victim of the Temple of Light, Raymond. After a simple greeting, Raymond shook his head and smiled bitterly. I'm not a victim of the Temple of Light. In fact, I'm a follower of the Temple of Light, a Puritan. Therefore, if we were to talk about darkness, it would be the current situation of the Black Temple of Light and the increasingly ugly clergy. Jack waved his hand disapprovingly. That's about the same. Knowing that he couldn't explain to Jack, Redmond turned to Tang and said, Mr. Tang, it's our first time meeting. Please forgive me for asking a question. What's your attitude towards the Temple of Light? Tang raised his eyebrows and looked at Jack. The latter was habitually observing the decorations in the room, as if he was thinking of stealing something. Tang's mouth twitched, and he retracted his gaze. Without much consideration, he said, If there's me, there won't be him. Redmond was startled when he heard this. After a while, he muttered, There aren't many people who dare to say that about the Temple of Light. That's why. Don't you know a lot about the Temple of Light? Just say what you need to say. If there's a grudge, there's a grudge. If there's a grudge, there's a grudge. Jack paused and pointed at Tang. This guy isn't good at anything else, but his ability to trick people is top-notch. Tang's heart skipped a beat when he heard this. He ignored Jack's mockery and asked in surprise, Mr. Redmond, you know a lot about the Temple of Light? My relationship with the Temple of Light is bad, so if you have any grudges against them, I can help you resolve them. However, I'm sorry, but how can I believe what you're about to say? The grudges between me and the Temple of Light. Redmond struggled for a moment, but he still took out a green book from his bosom and opened it. I'm a fallen noble. This is my family's genealogy. My father is a viscount and a clergyman of the Temple of Light. He used to be the deputy bishop of the church in Blue Tile City. Pause for a while. This identity is easy to verify. I believe this is enough to prove that what I'm about to say is not false. The aristocratic genealogy was the basis of a noble family's inheritance. It would record every member of the family and leave behind a few personal introductions. Generally speaking, the words on it might be exaggerated, but it would not be false. Of course, it would be useless if it was false because it could be easily verified. Tang took the green genealogy and saw the identity of Redmond's father at a glance. He was the deputy bishop of the church in Blue Tile City. This identity undoubtedly allowed him to come in contact with a lot of inside information about the Temple of Light. Closing the book and returning it, Tang frowned and asked, There's another question. Since your father is the deputy bishop of the church, why are you... You don't seem to be doing very well. It's very bad. Redmond did not have the intention to flatter himself. He clenched his fists and said in a low voice, My father is also a Puritan. When he was in office, he disliked some of the church's actions. For example, privately embezzling donations or clergymen using their status to ask for bribes. But everyone in the church hid it from my father. My father also suffered from not having any evidence to report them. Finally, One day, my father accidentally found out that the bishop and a few deputy bishops were keeping female believers in captivity in a village outside the city. Hee hee, a few more sesame, man. Tang Yin sneered and did not comment. When my father found out about this, he was immediately enraged by thunder. He immediately rushed in to question them. Hearing this, Jack covered his face. Damn, how stupid is that? If he secretly reported them, he might even be able to get a bishop. He paused and looked at Redmond's eyes that were about to spit fire. He could not help but put down his hand embarrassedly. Look at my cheap mouth. Continue. Redmond snorted and turned his head with a gloomy expression. In the end, my father was seriously injured and those crimes were placed on him. He was sent to the northern court of the Temple of Light on the same day. Before I could rush over to tell them the inside story, my father was by these vicious villains. Tang Yin and Jack looked at each other, speechless. Since those bishops and deputy bishops were found out about their dirty deeds, they were naturally worried that if they did not get your father killed as soon as possible, they would be in for a tragedy. Instead of thinking of a way to get your father out, you want to seek redress through the proper channels. Of course, they could not say this to Redmond. Tang Yin could see that Redmond was the same type of person as his father. They are indeed despicable villains. That's right, these guys should be hacked into pieces. Tang Yin agreed with a few words of righteous indignation. He nodded and said, Mr. Redmond, I now completely believe what you are going to say next. Yes, don't worry, I will help you take revenge. Redmond unexpectedly shook his head. Revenge is secondary. I will tell you the ugly inside story of the Temple of Light. I hope that Mr. Tang can expose the current situation and restore the pure faith. This is my father's last wish. What a pair of father and son. Tang Yin touched his nose and could not help but sigh in his heart. However, Tang Yin naturally would not refuse to embarrass the Temple of Light. He immediately nodded solemnly. Okay, I agree to your request. Thank you. Redmond stood up and bowed. I have been investigating all these years and know a lot of ugly inside stories of the Temple of Light. I will tell you now. Await. Tang and hurriedly stood up to return the bow. He waved his hand. This can't be rushed. Let me ask you first. Well, do you know the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild? Bounty Hunter Guild? I don't know. Redmond shook his head and did not wait for Tang to show a disappointed expression. He continued, but I know that the Temple of Light has a group of people who are similar to bounty hunters. They are responsible for secretly removing obstacles that threaten the status and image of the Temple of Light. He paused and waved his arms excitedly. He gritted his teeth and said, the Temple of Light is now completely rotten. When they face different voices, they don't think of using doctrines to reform and accommodate them. Instead, they label them as heretics for no reason and implement so-called divine punishment. They even secretly send people to assassinate them. They're no different from those thieves and assassins with dirty money. Tang Yin and Jack looked at each other when they heard this. The corners of their mouths and eyes twitched. Brother, don't be like this. If you have a problem with the Temple of Light, just scold them. But we are innocent. Chapter 731. Raymond's arrival was undoubtedly of great help to Tang Yin. In a sense, Jack's description of him as someone who had been tarnishing the Temple of Light for more than 10 years was very apparent. He was simply a portable hard drive that contained all the ugly secrets of the Temple of Light. After a simple conversation, Tang Yin naturally could not let Raymond leave. Of course, when Raymond decided to follow Jack, he should have known that if he did not join the opposing forces of the Temple of Light, he would not be able to escape death sooner or later. While temporarily keeping Raymond in the gray space, Tang Yin sent someone to verify Raymond's identity. After all, this matter was very important. No matter what, he had to verify it before he could be at ease. After settling down the somewhat agitated Raymond, Tang Yin and Jack looked at each other and could not help but let out a long sigh, somewhat speechless as they shook their heads. It had to be said that in their eyes, Raymond was too pedantic to the point that they disapproved of him. But from another point of view, This was a person who could make them feel ashamed of their inferiority just by using a shadow. Damn it. They could not afford to hurt a thief or an assassin. The other party was so great, and they were so insignificant, of course, in the end, they could only laugh and let it go. Tang In now understood the purpose of Jack's visit. He had probably heard that something had happened to the Gray Coat Army when he was returning to the south. He was a little worried about his friend's safety, but there was nothing he could do to help. Moreover, at that time, the Gray Coat Army had retreated into the depths of the 100,000 Mountains, and the secret organizations had moved one after another. Jack could not find Raymond anywhere, so he thought of Raymond. He thought that this person knew a lot about the ugly secrets of the Temple of Light and might be able to help. So he spent a lot of effort to find him and bring him here. But even if they were both well aware of this, Jack did not ask for credit, and Tang And did not formally express his gratitude. With their relationship, there was indeed no need for such superficial efforts. They called for a few bottles of good wine, and after a round of drinking, they could call it a day. Come, let's drink. Whoever doesn't drink is a coward. The Temple of Light is still chasing after you. What do you plan to do next? Ding! The wine bottle clinked, and Tang And raised his head to gulp down the wine. TSK plans? Wiping the remaining wine from the corner of his mouth, Jack smacked his lips. He was a little dazed from the intoxication, but after a flash, he simply shook his head. Why should I care so much? I'm just an ordinary thief. With a wanted criminal like you in front of me, the Temple of Light won't have time to deal with me. Continue to steal, continue to rob the rich to help the poor. Tang And couldn't help but laugh when he heard that. You King call that robbing the rich to help the poor? Guangji, are you alone? I'm also a poor man. The most valuable thing I have on me is this disguise. How is that not considered robbing the rich to help the poor? Jack said confidently. So this is Jack. Rubbing his nose, Tang And picked up a bottle of wine and threw it over. He said half-truthfully, I now have a death feud with the Temple of Light, and I'm planning to form an organization to fight to the death. Why don't you come over and help me? This wasn't the first time Tang In invited Jack, but previously it was to invite him to join the Gray Space, which was the Gray Coat Army. Now, it was to invite him to join the assassin organization that was about to be established. After hesitating, Jack slowly raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. Finally, he shook his head. Haha, you don't have to flatter me. With your current strength, I can't help you at all. And he burped and licked his lips. I still feel more accomplished by transferring precious things. I'm not good at killing people. Forget it. Tang And couldn't help but feel a little regretful when he heard that. In fact, after he asked that question, he probably knew that this would be the result. He nodded and didn't force it. He smiled and changed the topic. Transfer precious things. Haha, can't you just say that you stole it? You don't understand. I'm just sending the right thing to the right owner. What a glorious career. How can guys like you with bloody hands understand this great meaning? Yo, you King stole the truth. Same to you. Jack didn't stay in Mountain Stream City for long. The next morning, he left without saying goodbye. It wasn't that he was in a hurry to rush back to the south, but when he was drinking yesterday, Tang In heard that he had his eyes on a rare item in a city in the north. He was preparing to find a suitable owner for it, and even the counterfeit was ready. Tang In wasn't idle either. Although Redmond didn't know the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild, according to what he said before, Tang In already had some confirmation of his previous ridiculous conjecture. To be able to conduct a large-scale investigation, move quickly in the dark, and not attract attention. Was there a more suitable platform than the Bounty Hunter Guild? It had to be said that Jack did Tang In a great favor by bringing Redmond here. If the Bounty Hunter Guild was really backed by the Temple of Light, then Tang In would undoubtedly be at a disadvantage if he provoked them without knowing. Now that he knew the situation, he had to make some changes to his previous plan of killing the leader. The next day, Josiah's secret organizations in the north were all activated. Their goal was to find the Bounty Hunter Guild in each city and town and find out who the person in charge was. Tang In, on the other hand, would use the gray space to make the final blow, scattering and assassinating according to the opponent's strength, of course. Directly making the bounty hunter guild's locations public was also a solution. However, not to mention whether the police chiefs of each city had the guts of bows, the key was that these things couldn't be done in public. Things in the shadows naturally had to be solved in the shadows. This was also an unspoken rule. At noon, in a large city, the streets were bustling with people. Hey, there's a new clothing store here. Among the pedestrians, a beautiful woman pointed at the clothing store across the street. Her eyes shone with surprise as she grabbed the arm of the middle-aged man beside her. Dear, let's go take a look. The middle-aged man looked a little lazy. It was unknown if he really didn't want to go or if he was deliberately teasing the beautiful woman beside him. He touched his chin and looked a little hesitant. You have a lot of clothes. Seeing this, the beautiful woman looked a little unhappy and said coquettishly, accompany me to take a look. You're usually so busy, and you're also a businessman. Others can often accompany their wives, but you can't see anyone. Now that you finally have some time to rest, why don't you promise me? Promise me. Promise me. Okay. Under the envious and jealous gazes of the passers-by, the middle-aged man was half helpless and half enjoying the woman's sweet coquettishness. He raised his hands and compromised. Yeah. The beautiful woman was overjoyed when she saw this. She immediately dragged the middle-aged man into the crowd on the street, not forgetting to scold him. I don't want to say this, but you're not going out to start a business. Why can't I see you during the day and have to wait until late at night? You're always appearing and disappearing like a thief assassin. The middle-aged man's face stiffened when he heard this, but he quickly adjusted his expression. He waved his hand to block the crowd around him and said helplessly, What nonsense are you thinking? I'm not a thief assassin. He paused and muttered to himself, I'm much more advanced than them. In the noisy street, the beautiful woman naturally couldn't hear the second half of the sentence. She was still dissatisfied. Of course I know you're not, but you're making people angry. Sometimes I feel like I'm still single and unmarried. Well, it's business. I can't help it. Business, you only know about business. Then tell me, is business more important than me? She paused and walked to the middle of the street. Say it. Do you still need to think about it? You're hurting me. Let go of me. With a cry of pain, the beautiful woman struggled and angrily turned around. Before she could do anything, she saw the middle-aged man's eyes bulging. His left hand was tightly covering his throat. Scarlet blood was faintly seeping out from the gaps between his fingers. He staggered with a ferocious face. A high-pitched scream pierced through the clouds. The beautiful woman was pressed down on the ground. Her face instantly turned pale. She subconsciously wanted to break free and retreat, but her arm was tightly grasped by the middle-aged man. She barely managed to walk a few steps, but a shocking bloodstain was dragged out. Murder! Help! Wow! Whoosh! The clamorous street instantly fell into chaos, and the figures of people were like headless flies as they fled in panic. Some of the carriages were like lonely boats in the river. In an instant, they were overturned on the ground. At this time, at the mouth of the alley not far away, an ordinary-looking figure glanced at the scene and calmly flashed into the alley. This is just the beginning. Chapter 732. It was best not to put things on the table if they could be solved under the table. This was an appreciation that anyone with a little bit of experience would understand, and it was also a rule of the game. And anything that could be called a rule would have a so-called guardian. So, if it was not necessary, and if it was not forced into a desperate situation, it was best not to try to challenge it. Tangen did not challenge it, because he was not forced into a desperate situation, and also because he was not interested in doing so. Therefore, this assassination operation that was initiated by the Gray Space and paid for by the Bounty Hunter Guild had been secretly surging under the table. The morning sun rose, the afternoon sun was lazy, the quiet and obscure midnight, the dawn with few stars. This was the time. The bustling streets, the deep and winding alleyways, the magnificent manors, the ordinary houses. This was the location. Wealthy merchants, elegant nobles, old people, poor citizens. This was the person in charge of the Bounty Hunter Guild, and also the target. Time, location, target, all of them were present. The assassination was carried out accordingly. Perhaps some of the assassination occasions were too open and aboveboard. Perhaps some assassination methods were too arrogant and overbearing, but everything was within a certain limit. That is, although the person died, no one would know who killed the person, or it could be said that no one could be sure that it was a premeditated murder. In this way, the chaos was suppressed. The brand was still the brand. The nobles continued to enjoy the pleasures, and the civilians continued to nag about daily necessities. Everything was as usual. Of course, not everyone thought this way. 3 days later, in the Mountain Stream City Guard Hall. Bang, bang, bang. Beautiful. Really King beautiful. His hairy arms kept slapping the desk. Bose's only eye was as big as a copper bell. He bent over to look at all kinds of information in front of him, and he could not stop praising and looking excited. Bugnes, who knew his character well, naturally knew the meaning of beautiful. He raised his eyebrows. You think these are all deliberate assassinations? He waved his arms wildly. No, I think these are extremely beautiful masterpieces of art. Shaking his head, Bose looked completely intoxicated. Silent assassination on the street, accidental death in a car accident, drowning directly in the water, dozens of stabs in the body as if they were killed in a fight. Look, almost none of them are the same. It's like a classic textbook on assassination methods. Everything is there, and it's delicious enough. Hiss. Ah. Taking a deep breath, Bose opened his arms and hugged the air. The current Bose looked a little crazy. Seeing this, Bugnes touched his forehead and said helplessly, "Don't belittle our peers, although they are indeed idiots. But as you said, many of them were accidental deaths. Not all of them can be counted as premeditated murder. I can't be sure that these are all intentional murders, but at least I know." Tapping on the documents on the table, Bose curled his lips and said, "So many cases of unintentional deaths appear together. What does that mean?" Pausing for a moment, he continued, "Besides, I'm sure you can tell. In just 3 days, there were nearly 30 murders across dozens of towns. Since when did perverted murderers start appearing in groups? If that's the case, can brands still be saved?" The data was the most telling. When murder cases were gathered in one place, some hidden things gradually surfaced. First of all, identity. The identities of the victims in these murder cases were all different. It seemed that there was no connection at all. It seemed that the assassins were not picky and liked to kill at will. Admittedly, there were all kinds of birds in the forest. With the population base of Bran, it was not surprising that there were some perverted murderers. However, it was just as Bose had said. To travel across dozens of cities in 3 days, a single perverted murderer was definitely not enough. And to say that murderers appeared in groups was just a far-fetched joke. In summary, there was no doubt that this was definitely an organized and premeditated mass assassination. If Bose could detect the problem, Bugnes could naturally think of it as well. He spread out his hands and said, "There are not many organizations that can carry out such a large-scale assassination, and the method is so professional. Thieves Guild? Mercenary Guild? Or Bounty Hunter Guild?" Shaking his head, he said, "Thieves and mercenaries are impossible. The guild will not allow them to act so crazily." Touching his chin, Bose frowned slightly. As for the bounty hunters, these killing methods are a bit like their style, but they don't have the guts to commit such a crazy crime. Old Bao is old Bao. Although he has been living a comfortable life for so long, his professionalism has not dropped at all. Bugnes suddenly laughed and nodded. "Yes, they are not the ones who did it." Are you kidding me?" Bose quickly reacted and could not help but glare at Bugnes, but his impatience made him suppress his anger and asked, "Do you know who the assassins are?" I don't know, but I happen to know one of the victims." With a chuckle, Bugnes reached out and flipped through the dozens of documents on the table, and quickly found one of them. Yalman, a wealthy businessman, was assassinated on the street. Actually, his real name is Otis, and he is an extremely difficult guy to deal with. I didn't expect him to be killed so easily this time. He sighed and shook his head. Yes, he is also a leader of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Otis. Bose was stunned when he heard that, so these people who were killed were all from the Bounty Hunter Guild. It's hard to say without evidence, but it's probably close. Huh. Haha. This is getting more and more interesting. Rubbing his hands excitedly, Bose got up and paced back and forth a few steps. They dare to challenge the Bounty Hunter Guild, and they really did it. Well, not only do they have guts, but from the looks of this situation, the other party also has a strong intelligence organization and a strong assassination team. Who is it? Bugnes shook his head, and his expression was also a little conflicted. It's hard to guess. According to the Bounty Hunter Guild's usual style of doing things, they must have offended many forces. But if it is an open and above-board force, it is impossible not to mobilize the police station to cooperate with the operation. In this way, the other party can only be some forces that cannot be put on the table. Well, the Grey Coat Army is one of them. I heard that they have some conflicts with the Bounty Hunter Guild, but now they have retreated to the depths of the 100,000 Mountains and can't even take care of themselves. It's hard to guess. Forget it. Let's just treat it as a new force. Bose knew that he was much weaker than Bugnes in terms of detailed analysis. Seeing that he did not have any reliable ideas, he simply gave up. Whether it is for revenge or to get promoted, it will definitely be a mess for a while. Let's just watch from the sidelines. Pause for a while, seemed to have thought of something and laughed with his hands on his hips. Huh? It seems that it was a wise move for me to destroy the Bounty Hunter Guild in the city a few days ago. Just watch from the sidelines? Bugnes was a little surprised. Weren't you very interested just now? Why? Are you not going to intervene this time? He waved his hand. Are you kidding me? This is a fight between two forces. Wouldn't I be courting death if I intervene? I'm not going. Just as Tangen had commented before, although Bose was very happy to kill assassins, at the same time, he was also quite smart. His ability to judge the situation was first class, and he knew when to take risks and when to keep a low profile. Of course, if he did not have this ability, he would not have been able to survive until now. Bugnes smiled and nodded, obviously expecting Bose's attitude. Then he raised his eyebrows and said, "It's just that it's not easy for us to watch from the sidelines. After all, we have a reputation." This was not boasting, but self-deprecating. With Bose and Bugnes' reputation, if this matter blew up, they would very likely be transferred to take charge of this matter. He smiled bitterly. Bullsh asterisk T reputation. Now it seems that I really killed the wrong bounty hunter back then. Rubbing his nose, Bose picked up the heavy sword in the corner and sighed. Let's go to the gang's territory in the West District. Well, I was heroically injured in a conflict with the gang. How's that reason? Not bad, but I think I used it when dealing with the Grey Coat Army last time. Did I? That's a headache. Well, fell while riding a horse? No, that's too embarrassing. Conflict with the nobles? It seems that no one in this city dares to do that. What's with that look? He raised the heavy sword high. Sorry, there's no other way. It seems that the only way to convince people is for us to fight among ourselves. Chapter 733. Late at night, on a secluded street in the city. Most people had already fallen asleep, and there was almost no one on the streets. This was also the time when the creatures that were used to walking in the shadows were most active. At this moment, two figures, one tall and one short, slowly emerged from the shadows at the entrance of an alley. Water Ghost, I'm just looking for information. You don't have to be so careful. The short figure called Water Ghost quickly scanned his surroundings. Without turning his head, he snorted and said, Black Bear, if I wasn't careful that time in the forest, you would have been dead. Oh, please. Forest. Aren't you tired of saying that every time? Never. Because I know very well that I only have one chance to return to the embrace of the God of Light. The tall and muscular figure helplessly shrugged and said, All right. Are you sure we won't go to hell? After confirming that there was no danger, the short figure heaved a sigh of relief. He then turned around and glared at him before walking out of the alley. Seeing that his companion was a little annoyed, Black Bear tactfully changed the topic and said, "Water Ghost, who do you think is so bold to provoke our guild?" "Nonsense. If I knew, would I still need to spend money to buy clues? Just take a guess." "I don't know. I only know that the higher the reward, the more dangerous the mission is." "Also," Water Ghost paused and said hesitantly, "I heard that this time, the person who came did not come with good intentions. The guild has suffered heavy losses over the past few days. Many people in charge of various places have been assassinated." Do you remember Silverstone City that we were in a few months ago? The person in charge of the guild, Otis, was also killed. This. Black Bear sucked in a breath of cold air as his muscular body trembled. "That Otis who has been on the wanted list for years?" "No, no way." "I also want to say no, but that's the truth." TSK, someone in the crowd, slit his throat so cleanly. He didn't even have the slightest resistance. "I'm afraid he doesn't even know how he died." At this point, Water Ghost took a deep breath and suppressed the palpitations in his heart. He shook his head and said nothing. "Then why did you accept this mission?" "I'm just investigating the other party's identity. A reward of 100,000. It shouldn't be a problem if we're careful." As he said that, the Water Ghost turned into a small, winding path that was littered with garbage and pungent smell. He looked at the surroundings that he had thoroughly scouted just now and went forward and knocked on a broken wooden door. Creak! A gap appeared on the wooden door, and a wrinkled old face with a black beard and a sleepy expression was revealed. "Hey, old snake." As if they were familiar with each other, Shui Gue took the initiative to wave and greet him. "Sorry to disturb you at this time, but we urgently need some information." After muttering some curses, Old Sly Snake furrowed his brows and opened the wooden door. He had already disappeared behind the door. Seeing this, Shui Gue could not help but be slightly startled. Old Snake's temper today, no one would have a good temper if they were woken up from their sleep. Black Bear shrugged indifferently and stepped forward to push open the wooden door. The room was a little dark, and the only source of light was a small oil lamp on a filthy table. Black Bear, who had entered first, walked to the table and sat down casually. "Old Sly Snake, you're the most well-informed. Did anyone eye-catching enter the city today?" Before he finished speaking, a low growl sounded. "Something's not right." Shui Gue, who had just walked a few steps into the room, sniffed with his nose, and his expression changed drastically. "There's the smell of blood." Bang! The wooden door closed, and a mocking voice sounded. "Yo, your nose is quite sharp." Shui Gue and Black Bear heard the voice and suddenly turned their heads. They saw two people standing by the door that they had entered from. One of them was a plump man who looked like an unscrupulous merchant. "David, I told you to clean up before coming in. Now you've been exposed." The other man, who was carrying a blood-stained sword on his shoulder, curled his lips in disdain. "How can you blame me for this? I just got rid of that guy from before, and they came in right after. They're so eager to die, what can I do?" Seeing the two of them talking as if there was no one else around, Black Bear's body suddenly tensed up. He turned around and roared, "Old Sly Snake, you King betrayed me." Before Black Bear could finish his sentence, his pupils shrank. Hiss! Black Bear instinctively tried to dodge the attack, but it was too late. He could only watch as the blade approached him. Black Bear was not thinking about the fear of death. Instead, he was thinking about what Aqua Ghost had said before. Realization dawned on Black Bear's face. Otis's throat was slit cleanly, and he did not even have the chance to retaliate. This must be what it felt like to be in such a situation. "Actually, you're the ones who sent yourself to me." A soft sigh. This was not the voice of Old Sly Snake, but it was the last sentence that Black Bear heard before his consciousness fell into endless darkness at the same time. With a bang, Shui Gue took out a short sword and fiercely rushed to the door. Although there were two people in front of him, for some reason, Shui Gue felt that the old Sly Snake behind him was more dangerous, so he decided to force his way out. Shui Gue's instinctive judgment was correct. The old sly snake behind him was indeed more dangerous than the two people in front of him. However, at the same time, there was another fatal problem. That was, the two people in front of him were not pushovers either, huh? With a chuckle, David took a step forward and slashed down with his battle aura sword. The angle, strength, and timing of the attack were all perfect, forcing Shui Gue to dodge to the side. At this time, the ordinary-looking fatty suddenly appeared in front of him like a ghost and quickly thrust out his dagger. He barely managed to block the attack. Ding! Sparks flew, and before Shui Gue could breathe a sigh of relief, the sword that he had just dodged came again like a shadow. He retreated and gritted his teeth to block the attack. Bang! *T. As soon as he blocked the sword, Shui Gue could not help but feel uneasy. The strength of the sword was far beyond his expectations. His body flew back like a cannonball. Behind him was the dangerous old sly snake, but he did not follow up with another attack like Shui Gue had expected. Instead, he was focused on changing the magic rune stone inside the small oil lamp. Mute magic? Shui Gue glanced at the rune stone and suddenly understood. No wonder there was a battle here, but they did not hear anything at all when they were scouting the surroundings. After this thought flashed through his mind, Shui Gue was about to adjust his body and land on the ground, but his body froze. Pooh! He lowered his head and saw the sharp tip of the dagger sticking out his heart. He stirred it, and a few drops of blood on it were dazzling. That fatty was so fast. Pooh! He simply put away the dagger and hugged Shui Gue's body. Blood immediately splashed half of Harry's body. He frowned and rolled his eyes. *CK, I just changed my clothes. David walked over and bent down to drag Black Bear's body. Haha, that's enough. This bounty hunter is quite strong. He actually managed to block 2 of our combined attacks. He's much stronger than the guy just now. It was a simple conversation, but it was obvious that this was not the first time they had done this tonight. That was indeed the case. The crazy assassinations in the first 3 days were fruitful. On one hand, the members of the Gray Space were indeed very strong. On the other hand, the Bounty Hunter Guild was not prepared for this at all. Naturally, Tang In and the others succeeded easily. Of course, this good situation would not last long. After nearly 30 people in charge of the districts died, the Bounty Hunter Guild finally reacted. Immediately, on the mission boards of the various guilds, the identities of the assassins like Tang and were at the top of the list. The bounty was very tempting. Tangen's response to this was also very simple. He took the lead and occupied the den of the information dealers in the city, waiting for them to come. As it turned out, this method was very good and powerful. As the saying went, every profession had its own specialization. When it came to information, it was naturally best to look for information dealers. Most of the greedy bounty hunters had the same idea as Tang, and therefore, although this place was very inconspicuous, the number of bounty hunters who had been killed since nightfall had already exceeded 2 digits. Click. Carefully putting on the silent magic runestone, Tang In waved his hand and said, "Don't talk nonsense. Hurry up and drag them away. Maybe there will be..." Before he could finish his words, meow. A long cat's voice came from the back of the house. David and Harry heard it and stopped in their tracks. This was the warning sound made by the members of the Gray Space outside when they discovered that the target was approaching. They turned their heads and looked at Tang Un, whose mouth was twitching. They held their foreheads and said, "Damn it, my mouth is cheap." Knock, knock. There was a knock on the door. Shaking his head, Tang In gestured to David and Harry to wait for a moment. He got up and walked to the side of the door. When he opened it, a glimmer of light leaked out. He looked up and down at the black-robed man standing outside the door. He deliberately covered his face with a wide hat and smacked his lips. "And a bounty hunter?" The black-robed man was obviously stunned when he heard this. He nodded subconsciously. "That's good." Murmuring in a low voice, Tang Un's figure flashed. His figure, which was half inside the door, instantly appeared outside the door. He reached out and grabbed the throat. Crack! The crisp sound of bones breaking echoed in the deep passage. Bang! The glimmer disappeared, and the wooden door closed again. He walked back a few steps and threw the corpse to David, who was a little stunned. Tang and pinched his eyebrows and sat back at the table. This business is a little hot. Let's hurry up and deal with it. Okay. Chapter 734. The next morning. Raising his arm, Tang yawned at the door of the hut and looked around. At this time, the sun had not risen and the sky was gray. As far as the eye could see, there was still no one. Well, inform everyone to go to the secret agency in the city to rest for half a day. After saying this to Harry, Tang closed the wooden door behind him casually, like a civilian going out to exercise in the morning. Of course, if the people in the hut could still speak, they would definitely not think so. Walking along the trash-strewn path and turning into the alley, David followed Tang in and asked with a smile, "Hey, boss, how do you think the Bounty Hunter Guild will react after receiving our big gift? What else can they do? They will just increase the bounty and continue to track us. If that's the case, the Bounty Hunter Guild is just so." David shook his head gently and looked a little disapproving. Tang raised his eyebrows. "Oh, you think so? Isn't that so?" Of course not. Tang knew David's rough character very well and knew that he could not think too much with his brain. He waved his hand and explained, "In fact, the actual situation is the opposite. The reason why our current operation is so smooth is because the Bounty Hunter Guild is too powerful, so powerful that they can't see us at all." Pause for a while and thought for a while. Well, let's make an inappropriate analogy. It's like a mosquito dueling with a lion. The lion's strength is, of course, much stronger than the mosquito, but the mosquito can silently go around to the lion's back and bite it hard. The lion has a lot of strength, but it can't hurt the mosquito. The Bounty Hunter Guild is the lion now. As for us, of course, we are stronger than the mosquito, but our strength can't be compared to the other party. Being powerful is not good? David scratched his head and could not understand for a while. You can't say that. Tang chuckled and shook his head. The so-called strong and weak are actually relative. The important thing is to grasp the key point. If the mosquito keeps flying in the sky, the lion naturally can't do anything. However, if the Bounty Hunter Guild can confirm our identity and location, you'll be able to see how powerful they are. Pausing for a moment, he walked out of the alley. Of course, other than this, there is a natural advantage to having a large influence, and that is they can afford to lose. There is no need to mention the bounty hunters just now. Although there were many of them, they were not worth mentioning. We've killed so many guild leaders in the past few days. If it were the gray space, losing even one of its members would be a huge blow to us. Yet the gray space is able to take it. They're just silently looking for us, not showing any signs of anger. This is the foundation of a great power. David couldn't help but click his tongue when he heard this, and there was no longer any trace of contempt on his face. Just as he was about to say something, a gray-robed figure walked over from the opposite side of the street. He immediately shut his mouth. The two of them brushed past each other in a hurry. The air was faintly filled with the smell of wine. At this moment, Tang En's eyebrows suddenly twitched. He glanced behind him from the corner of his eyes and saw the gray-robed man flash into the alley they came from. David seemed to have sensed something too. He didn't look back, but he said with uncertainty, "This is another bounty hunter. He looks quite strong. Don't worry about him." Tang En waved his hand casually and looked away. He shook his head and laughed. As expected. Well, he's really lucky. I hope he won't be scared later." David thought of something, and his expression was a little mischievous, as if he was gloating. This strong bounty hunter was indeed lucky. If he had come earlier, he would probably be lying on the ground now. Tang En and David didn't take this small episode to heart. David also asked the question that he wanted to ask just now. "Boss, what should we do next? Continue to kill bounty hunters?" Shaking his head, Tang En said calmly, "There's no end to killing bounty hunters. Even if more of them die, it won't hurt the foundation of the guild. Just scare them a little and make them hesitate when they accept the mission." David's eyes couldn't help but twitch. Although bounty hunters were notorious, their terrifying image was still deeply rooted in people's hearts. But when it came from Boss Tangen's mouth, it sounded very casual, as if he was casually killing a chicken. After the twitch, the corners of David's mouth gradually rose, and he couldn't hide the pride in his expression. Of course, Boss also had the right to say so. Not to mention strength, compared to the courage to fight with the Temple of Light. What was a mere bounty hunter? The morning fog gradually dissipated, and women who woke up early appeared on both sides of the street in twos and threes. Of course, Tangen didn't know that David's thoughts had gone back and forth twice just now. He continued, "So, our next target is still the person in charge of the guild. This time, the other party is already prepared. I'll do it myself." After a pause, he looked up at the red rising sun in the east. Kill them one city after another. Clean up one area after another. I don't believe that we can't hurt them. We can't force the higher-ups of the guild to come out. In the alley. Damn it. Drinking messes up things. Drinking messes up things. The gray-robed man cursed endlessly as he ran along the side of the alley. Just by looking at his speed, it was obvious that he wasn't an ordinary person. In fact, it was indeed so. Tangen's previous guess was right. This gray-robed man was indeed a bounty hunter, and his level wasn't low. In fact, he had already seen a mission on the guild's mission board last night. For the sake of the high bounty, he accepted it. Originally, he wanted to solve it as soon as possible and make a windfall, but he had a bad habit of drinking. After a night of drinking, he finally sobered up and rushed over in a hurry. The guild's mission wasn't unique. He was also worried that someone would finish the mission before him. Then, this windfall would undoubtedly fly away. Turning into the trash-strewn alley, he walked towards the broken wooden door. Drinking messes up things. Old snake. Open the door. The arm that was about to knock on the door suddenly stopped in the air. The gray-robed man slightly stretched out his red, drunkard nose and sniffed. An excessively strong smell of blood instantly passed through the wooden door and filled his nostrils. His expression changed greatly. This F*CK? His figure flashed, and he instantly retreated a few feet away. The gray-robed man's back was pressed against the wall behind him. He vigilantly looked around, and the little bit of drunkenness from before instantly disappeared. Silence. After a moment, the gray-robed man quickly left the place and disappeared into the narrow alley. However, he didn't leave. Instead, he took a big detour and climbed into the house from the back door. He cautiously approached the back door, flipped his hand, and flashed a dagger. Along the seam of the door, he accurately slashed it. Creak! The wooden door opened. Behind the back door was a small courtyard. There were piles of debris everywhere, some of which had already become moldy. The gray-robed man looked around with a somewhat hesitant expression, but in the end he slowly walked in. With the dagger held horizontally, his body slightly leaned forward. His footsteps were light and cautious, like a wildcat preparing to steal dried fish. There was no danger, and he smoothly approached the main house. However, the gray-robed man didn't dare to enter. Instead, he climbed up to the skylight of the roof. However, the crystal glass was too dirty. He basically couldn't see the situation inside. So, he simply waved his dagger again and removed it. As soon as he gently removed the glass, the smell of blood instantly filled the air. It was strong and suffocating. The gray-robed man felt as if he had personally opened a door to the blood pool of hell. It made him shudder. After calming himself down, the gray-robed man stuck his head in and blinked. Even though he had already prepared himself mentally, his eyes couldn't help but be filled with horror. The small and messy house was dazzling scarlet. Blood flowed freely. Some parts of the house had already dried up, but some parts were still spreading. It was almost reaching the main door of the house. And in this pool of blood, there were nearly 100 corpses lying in disorder. Most of them were facing upwards. Their faces were full of shock, confusion, fear, and horror. Their expressions were all mixed together. Their empty eyes were looking in this direction. Gulp. The gray-robed man swallowed his saliva with difficulty. It wasn't that he hadn't seen dead people before. As a bounty hunter, he had seen more tragic scenes than this. But the key was that he knew almost all of the people below: Water Ghost, Black Bear, Night Owl, Lone Wolf, Mad Dog. They had different nicknames, but they all had the same identity as him. That was a bounty hunter. While he was in a daze, there seemed to be a bloody shadow swaying in the corner of his eyes. He subconsciously turned his head to look. On the gray-white wall, there were a few bloody words dragged out. It was dazzling and eye-catching. "You're next." The last exclamation mark was drawn diagonally. It was like a guillotine, full of murderous intent. After a while, the gray-robed man slowly retracted and sat on the roof tiles. Trembling, he took out an exquisite wine jar from his arms and muttered to himself, "Drinking is still better. Drinking is still better." Chapter 735. The duel between the mosquito and the lion was still ongoing. This was destined to be an unfair duel. Fortunately, this unfairness was not reflected in the outcome. The mosquito was trying its best to tear the lion's skin and flesh, bit by bit, never giving up. The lion, on the other hand, had tyrannical strength. It roared again and again with an intimidating aura, but could not find any traces of the enemy as it looked around blankly. There was no shortage of smart people everywhere. The situation that Tang, On, and David had analyzed previously was naturally thought of by the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild, but there was really not much they could do now. There was a joke that went like this: a giraffe's foot was stepped on, and only after a day did it start to cry out in pain. Of course, this was an exaggeration, but it also happened to be the dilemma that the Bounty Hunter Guild was facing. They were too powerful, and their business was even more extensive. This was originally the foundation and symbol of their power. But who would have thought that this was their strongest point? Now, they were being held tightly to the ground and beaten up, looking a little embarrassed. They had also taken measures in time. The level of the mission on the bulletin board was getting higher and higher, and the bounty quota was also raised again and again. However, as the people who accepted the mission were constantly assassinated silently, the bounty hunters began to hesitate. They were good at the business of living on the edge of the blade, and they were very open-minded about life and death. Basically, they would not have such a mentality of fear. However, when it came to such a hopeless mission, they had no choice but to start hesitating. The bounty hunters were not fools, or even if they were fools, they had basically been ruthlessly eliminated by this cruel circle. At this point, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that this was a battle between two forces, and the bounty hunters were nothing more than cannon fodder being pushed to the front. If they were not careful, they would prove a sentence that was widely spread in the circle now. You are the next. No bounty hunter was willing to be the next. After all, there were many missions that could make money, so why bother to get involved in this muddy water? Perhaps this was the problem of cohesion that the old butler mentioned before. Guilds were nothing more than a platform for bounty hunters to earn money. There were plenty of opportunities like this, and there were even a few such platforms. There was no need to risk their lives for this. With that thought in mind, the quest was still hanging high up on the notice board, but the number of hunters who dared to accept it was decreasing. This situation undoubtedly made the upper echelons of the guild very unhappy, but there was nothing they could do. After all, they couldn't force the bounty hunters to accept this quest. If he did that, the guild would cease to exist. In desperation, they could only continue to increase the bounty to attract more bounty hunters who valued money more than their lives. At the same time, they secretly sent out their own forces. While the guilds waited anxiously, a new round of massacres continued to unfold, dawn in a certain town. Boss, the person in charge of the guild here, must have heard the news and is hiding. It's a pity that this town isn't big. He should be at his mistress's house now. There are quite a few guard around. Tang narrowed his eyes and looked at the independent small building in front of him. He then looked up at the sky and nodded with a smile. It's normal for a man to show his true colors. It's getting late. I'll try my best to let him die in the belly of a woman. I think it's a good ending. Wait a moment. After saying that, his figure flashed and disappeared on the spot like a wisp of smoke. blending into the final twilight. After looking around, David sighed. I can't see through it. Boss's movements are getting weirder and weirder. After a pause, David turned his head. Harry, what are you thinking about? I'm thinking about a man's true colors. You said that Lena and Boss. F***, you don't want to live anymore. How dare you say that about Boss? David shivered and hurriedly looked around. Then he bent down and whispered with a wretched face, but I like it. All right, what happened to Boss and Lena? What did you find? That's not it. I just feel that there's something going on. TSK, intuition. Tisk, you're not a woman. What kind of intuition do you have? In less than 5 minutes, just as David and Harry were whispering ambiguously, Tang's figure flashed again. Looking at the two who were frozen, he asked, What are you talking about? You look so happy. Harry decisively took over the conversation and shook his head. Oh, nothing. Boss, you succeeded? Tang looked suspiciously at David, who was avoiding his gaze. He didn't care and waved his hand casually. Let's go. Next. In the afternoon, in a city. His arm pointed forward. The person in charge of the guild here is a wealthy businessman. He's very cautious and has been curled up at home for a few days. It's this small manor. Manor? This is a King fortress. Harry looked at the manor with tall walls and thick doors. He couldn't help but shake his head speechlessly. The target of an assassination is always a person, not a fortress. It's not a big problem. Looking at the heavily guarded manor in the distance, Tang narrowed his eyes and disappeared again. Go to the city gate and wait. I'll be there in half an hour. Half an hour? David and Harry's mouth twitched. They didn't leave immediately. Instead, they narrowed their eyes and looked in the direction where Tang disappeared. It wasn't that they didn't believe in Boss Tang, but they simply wanted to see what kind of assassination method would take only half an hour to avoid this heavily guarded manor. The mystery was soon revealed. As soon as the outermost patrol team of the manor passed by, the last person disappeared in an instant. Not to mention the guards who were still patrolling. Even David and Harry, who had been paying attention, didn't know how the guard disappeared. After a few short breaths, the guard appeared again. His helmet was slightly lowered, and he followed the footsteps of the people in front of him. He calmly patrolled the fortress as usual. TSK, what a fast movement. F***, what a fast change of clothes. Cursing, Harry and David each expressed their unique opinions. They looked at each other and couldn't help but be speechless. After coming back to their senses, they shook their heads and slowly left the hiding place. If Boss sneaked into the manor, would that guy still be alive? Stop joking. In the evening, on the bustling streets of the small city. Boss, it's a bit troublesome this time. Standing on the roof of a shop and looking at the bustling streets under the bright signboards in the distance, David scratched his head. The other party seems to have reacted quickly. They even set up a trap. Harry also shook his head and sighed. TSK, what a big move. Most of the people on this street are their people. The bigger the scene, the more flaws there were. There are still some differences between warriors and ordinary people. Even if they were warriors who were proficient in disguise and hiding, in the eyes of professionals like David and the others, they could still distinguish them. For example, in the current situation, the person in charge of the guild was bold. Or it could be said that he had received orders from his superiors. He actually brought a few guards and strolled on the street in such a dangerous situation. Of course, there was a reason for this. That was, the seemingly ordinary crowd was in fact mostly hidden soldiers of the other party. Judging from this situation, David's guess was still reasonable. The person in front of them was just the person in charge of a guild in a small city. With his authority, it was naturally impossible for him to mobilize so many people to set up such a scene. Therefore, the only explanation was that the guild had completely reacted and specially sent people to set up a trap to lure them in. Tang's expression didn't change when he saw this. The corner of his mouth rose slightly. Haha, are you finally angry? I've been waiting for a long time. He reached out and took the longbow from the gray space member behind him. He knocked an arrow and first aimed at the person in charge of the guild. After a pause, he changed to an explosive arrow. After waiting for about 10 seconds, he lifted the longbow and released the string. Whoosh! Boom! The colorful signboard hanging outside the large clothing shop in the distance suddenly exploded. The colorful crystal shards instantly shone in the air and fell like a rainbow rain. His long and narrow eyes narrowed instantly. Like an eagle's sharp eyes, it seemed to be able to see through this blurred scene. He released the string again. The pitch-black arrow whistled through the air and instantly crossed a distance of hundreds of feet and directly sank into the colorful raindrops. Nice scenery. Turning around, as if he didn't care about the result, Tang in casually threw the longbow back. Let's go to the next place. At this time, damn it, roar. A long roar mixed with anger and grievance came from afar. It was a sharp and long hiss. Over there, chase after them. A night of chaos. Chapter 736. Shanghai City. Previously, if one said that Xiongguan City was the military city of the north, then Shanghai City was the trading city of the north. As the most developed city in the north, there were naturally countless merchants here. To put it bluntly, if one threw a brick on the streets and hit 10 people, at least 7 or 8 of them are merchants. However, in this massive merchant community, if anyone mentioned Merchant Zachary's name, most of the citizens in the city would raise their thumbs to express their heartfelt admiration and respect. Such a reputation wasn't because Zachary was rich. In truth, although he was rich, he wasn't the most successful merchant in the city. However, if one were to judge the kindest person in the city, the first person to be mentioned would definitely be Zachary. Repairing churches, helping the poor, giving bread and cotton clothes to the homeless. As long as it was a good deed, Zachary would be generous and never fall behind. What was even rarer was that he had been doing this for decades without stopping. He had truly managed to reverse the bad impression of merchants who only cared about profits with his own strength. Some people even joked that if one day Zachary was on the assassination list of the Thief Guild, no matter how high the bounty was, no one would be willing to accept it. This was a true, kind-hearted person, but now this kind-hearted person was feeling a little depressed. In the sealed room, there was only a long table and a few wooden chairs. Sitting at the head of the table, Zachary pinched the space between his eyebrows. His rosy and plump face was somewhat gloomy. After a moment of silence, he opened his eyes and looked at the dozen or so middle-aged and elderly people on his left and right sides. So, not only have we not been able to find the other party, we don't even know whether the other party is a man or a woman. Yes, President. A middle-aged man on his left braced himself and said, "The closest was in Shaoyi City 2 days ago. They killed the person in charge of the branch guild with one arrow from a few hundred meters away. When our people chased up, they were already gone." Pause for a while. The other party is very strong, and their ability to disguise and hide is even better. Our professional trackers can't find any trace of them, and the key point is the other party didn't reveal a lot of people, and some of them even fought alone. With such an assassination style, it's very difficult for us to determine their identity. Hearing this, Zachary held his forehead, his face expressionless. Haha, such a big bounty hunter guild, let alone being fooled by the other party. We don't even know who the enemy is. Well, who can tell me that this is just a joke, although it's not funny? The room was silent. Speaking of which, needless to say, the famous good people in Shanghai City were the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. That was the truth. Zachary was the guild's branch leader. He was in charge of managing the guild's affairs in the north of Bran. Seeing that no one replied, Zachary's expression darkened. He lifted his eyelids and said, "Pai Li, you're in charge of the guild's intelligence. Give me some information about the other party." When the middle-aged man heard this, his face turned bitter. However, he still hesitated and said, "Guild leader, based on the current intel, the other party should be an organization similar to ours. Their intel network is also strong, and they can find out the locations of our branch guilds. At the same time, The team they are in charge of isn't big, with less than 100 people. However, their strength is really strong, and they're good at all kinds of assassinations. After a pause, he carefully looked at Zachary's expression. The other party's first assassination location was in Silverstone City. We have already sent people to investigate, but there hasn't been any progress. Shut up, idiot. With a sudden shout, Zachary's usually kind and benevolent face became somewhat ferocious. His eyes emitted a cold light. I don't want to listen to this nonsense. Now, immediately circle the target for me. Yes, yes, yes. Wiping the sweat on his forehead, Piley nodded and said, the only ones with such intel network around Silverstone City are the officials. And. Shaking his head regretfully, Zachary calmly got up and walked behind Piley. He reached out and gently put his hand on the latter's shoulder. Continue. And in the Gray Coat Army's intel network. Piley's body trembled slightly, and dense beads of sweat rolled down from his temples. He nodded and reached out to take out a short knife. Gray Coat Army, this is one, and in. Piley's throat kept moving. Although he couldn't see the situation behind him, looking at the pity in the eyes of the people opposite him, he undoubtedly realized something. His face instantly turned pale, and there might be a mole in the guild. Oh, a mole, this is your conclusion? Zachary smiled and turned his head, frowning. The guild has a single line of communication. The only ones who know the locations of so many branch guilds are us. So, you suspect that I'm a mole? No. It's not you. Of course it's not you. If it's not me, and then it's you. As soon as he finished speaking, blood splattered everywhere. The blade of the short knife had completely pierced into Piley's back. Bang! Piley's eyes bulged. His hands grabbed the table a few times as if he wanted to get up and resist, but in the end, only a few deep scratch marks were left. He lay down powerlessly, silent and motionless. Letting go of the short knife's wooden handle, this well-known philanthropist in the city looked down indifferently at the blood on his hands. He expressionlessly wiped the blood on Piley's clothes a few times, then turned his head and looked around at the stiff bodies of the higher-ups. He spread his hands. All right, the mole has been eliminated. Later, hand him over to the higher-ups and tell them that we will resolve this matter as soon as possible. Do you have any objections? The higher-ups, hearing this, the hearts of the higher-ups trembled. Smelling the blood that assailed their nostrils, they no longer felt sympathy for the death of the rabbit and the fox. They kept shaking their heads. That's good. Sitting back in the wooden chair, Zachary continued to pinch between his eyebrows. Everyone, the higher-ups, are exerting a lot of pressure. Previously, the news was almost leaked in Mountain Stream City, and now this matter has happened. Well, I want to know who the other party is right now. I just want to know how to quickly resolve this matter. Give me some suggestions. After a pause, an old man with white hair said hesitantly, the reason why we are so passive now is mainly because we don't know what the other party's goal is. How about negotiating? What a joke. A middle-aged man heard this and immediately expressed strong opposition. We are the Bounty Hunter Guild. How can we not take revenge after being beaten like this, and even take the initiative to invite the other party to negotiate? Wait for me to finish. The key is the pressure from the higher-ups. Although there were only a few people in the room, it was still a bit chaotic with everyone talking. In fact, to be able to reach their position, they were naturally people with a decisive nature. But it had to be said that the strength of the Bounty Hunter Guild and the long-term comfortable life had worn away their ruthless nature. When making decisions, they were also somewhat overcautious and hesitant. Of course, the more important thing was that the pressure from the higher-ups that they kept to themselves was forcing them to make a hasty decision. Quiet. Slapping the table, Zachary frowned and looked at the old man who proposed to negotiate. Continue. My plan is very simple. Invite the other party to negotiate and see their attitude. This way, no matter what, at least we will know the other party's identity and goal. Even if the negotiation fails in the end, we won't be as passive as we are now. And by doing this, we can also answer to the higher-ups. Seemingly moved by the last sentence, Zachary raised his eyebrows and pondered for a while. Squinting his old eyes, overflowing with light, he said, "We can invite them to negotiate, but the Bounty Hunter Guild can't lose face. Identity goal. I hope that we can catch them and force them to tell us." "President, you mean?" The middle-aged man who had vehemently opposed earlier was overjoyed when he heard this. He immediately pushed his chair and stood up. "No problem. I will go and mobilize the experts. As long as they dare to show up, they will die without a burial place." He nodded. "Well, the problem now is how to pass the message to the other party." "Piley, where are the other party now?" Zachary paused and turned to look at Pai Lee, who was lying in a pool of blood. He was stunned and shook his head slightly. "Oh, poor Piley, I am so sorry. But someone has to bear the responsibility. I can't help it. I hope you can return to the embrace of the God of Light." Lowering his eyes, Zachary made a prayer gesture in front of his chest. His expression was full of sincere sorrow, and he looked like a good person. Chapter 737. A few days later, on the outskirts of a small city. "Not here again?" Tangan looked at Harry, who was rushing over with a helpless expression, and asked first. "Yes, the brothers at the secret agency said that the person in charge of the guild here sneaked out of the city last night and is still missing." Harry scratched his head and looked a little disdainful. "Boss, this is already the 5th one. Deliberately avoiding us. Is the Bounty Hunter Guild afraid?" Harry's disdain was not to be blamed. Since yesterday, the situation had obviously changed. The people in charge of the guilds had changed their previous style of fighting to the death and hurriedly fled the area, causing Tang Un and the others to miss several times. Originally, it was normal not to avoid if they could not afford to offend, but it also depended on who the opponent was. This was the Bounty Hunter Guild that had stood proudly in the brand for hundreds of years. Now that they had adopted such a passive and non-resisting attitude, it naturally made Harry and the others despise them greatly. Of course, at the same time, they felt a little helpless because if the strong side was willing to put down their pride, then the weak side would undoubtedly have fewer chances. Not to that extent. "Let's wait and see," Tang In said non-committally. He still did not believe that the Bounty Hunter Guild would give in so easily. He touched his chin and looked up at the small city wall. "Well, let's wait for David and the others to come back." Sure enough, David rushed out of the city not long after, bringing a different news. "Boss, the Bounty Hunter Guild wants to negotiate with us." Although Tangan was sure that the other party would have some tricks up their sleeves, the negotiation with a hint of compromise still stunned him, and he frowned slightly. "Source of the news?" David said directly. "The underground forces in the city are spreading it. I've confirmed it. The news is true." They're kneeling after killing so few people?" "Really?" Shaking his head, Harry had a look of disbelief. He paused and narrowed his eyes like a profiteer. "There's no trick in this, right?" Disdain was disdain, but Harry would not underestimate the Bounty Hunter Guild because of this. He doubted the sincerity of this so-called negotiation at the first moment. However, Tang In waved his hand indifferently. "It doesn't matter if there's any trick or not. This negotiation is a joke to us. What we want is to replace the Bounty Hunter Guild's position in the north. There's no way the other party will agree to this. Sooner or later, we'll have to fight." Pausing for a moment, he muttered thoughtfully, "But this is an opportunity. Since it's a negotiation, the other party's status is definitely not low. They should be able to give us something new." Where's the negotiation location?" David's expression was a little strange. 3 days later, Coldwater City. Tangan couldn't help but be taken aback when he heard this, and then he came to a realization. Although their choice of assassination route this time was very arbitrary, they were still going back the same way. If the other party analyzed carefully, they should be able to roughly guess the scope of their next target. This was also the reason why the other party was so confident in setting up the trap. It was also the prerequisite for spreading the news this time. If that's the case, the distance between us and Hanshui City, David spread out his hands and said, If we go in a straight line, the next stop will be Hansui City. Rubbing his nose, Tang and shook his head and sighed. No wonder I keep feeling that this place is a little familiar. It turned out that unknowingly, Tang and had already led the gray space back and forth and returned to the starting point. Since the other party had already proposed to negotiate, and it was Hansui City, Tang and naturally had no interest in continuing to torture noobs. He directly led everyone back to Hansui City. After returning to the city's secret agency stronghold, Tang learned that Luke had safely escorted Josiah back to camp and had returned the day before yesterday with an unexpected person. Little Carol? Are you sure? Yes, sir, I'm sure. Listening to the secret agency's report, Tang was in a daze for a moment. He hadn't seen his sister for a long time. Or to be more precise, they hadn't seen each other since he went to the front lines at the beginning of the year. When he returned to Bran, Tang had learned some news about little Carol for Josiah. He knew that she had once come out to look for him. At that time, she had even gotten rid of Harry and the others who were secretly following her. In the end, because she had accidentally saved Raymond, she and Jack had been hunted down by the Temple of Light. Fortunately, nothing happened in the end. The corners of his mouth gradually rose, and his usually indifferent face warmed up a little. Tang smiled and asked, "Where is she now?" "At Miss Lena's place." "Sir, do you need me to inform her?" "Oh, thank you. No need, I'll go over now." Waving his hand, Tang thanked him with a smile. He then dismissed David and the others and impatiently left. Lena's alchemy hut was by the Hansui River, close to the southern city wall. Tang's current location wasn't far from there. He didn't drive a carriage and instead quickly shuttled through the alleys, heading towards the southern part of the city. But when crossing a commercial street, Tang's footsteps suddenly paused. He turned his head and looked at the signboard of a hotel not far away. After hesitating for a moment, he finally walked towards a hotel. "Sir, are you staying here, or I'm looking for someone?" "Oh." Tang walked up to the second floor of the hotel, looked around, and walked towards the innermost room. He paused at the door and reached out to knock. Knock, knock, knock. Just as the rhythmic knocks fell, the door silently slid open. A thin figure appeared behind the door like a ghost. He was wearing a black robe and almost blended in with the pitch-black room behind him. He raised his head slightly, and a cold silver light flashed. It turned out that the face under the hood wasn't that of a normal person, but rather a silver metal mask emitting a cold light. Coupled with the indifferent and silent eyes behind it, he looked very strange. "Boss," a dry and hoarse voice sounded. Tang glanced at the silver mask, paused for a moment, and then looked up and down at the black-robed man. He calmly asked, "Have you recovered from your injury?" "Yes." The black-robed man nodded slightly and remained silent. At this time, the sound of footsteps came from the stairs. It was very clear in the quiet corridor. The black-robed man silently stepped back, and Tang stepped into the room and closed the door behind him. The doors and windows of the room were tightly closed, leaving no trace of light. After entering the room, it was as if he was in a pool of ink, and he couldn't even see his own fingers. But of course, this didn't cause any trouble for Tang, and of course, it was the same for the black-robed man. Taking a slight breath, Tang calmly said, "Since you have chosen to come back, then from now on, there is no Michaud in this world, only a knife. Your previous subordinates will still be under your command. I will set up a killer organization, and your task will be to deal with the darkest things in the organization." That's right. The man wearing the silver mask was Michaud. At that time, in the vast river with Michaud's injury, it was impossible for him to go ashore with his bare hands. But don't forget that Tang came on a small boat, and the place where Michaud was thrown out of the cabin was near the boat. As Luke speculated, Tang couldn't bear to kill Michaud. Of course, there was another important reason. If Tang wanted to set up a killer organization, he needed more reliable people to assist him. Although David, Luke, and the others were loyal enough, in terms of ability, they were much weaker than Michaud. There was also a difference in temperament. If a member of the Gray Space or a secret organization betrayed them, David, Luke, and the others would be hesitant and soft-hearted, but Michaud wouldn't. Of course, This was only Tang En's prediction. In fact, he had given Michaud two options. One was to leave this place, commit suicide, or be killed by someone else. The second option was to come back, but he could only stay in a place where the light couldn't reach and become Tang En's knife in the dark. Without hesitation, Michaud nodded in the dark. Okay, you don't have to agree so quickly. I hope you can think about it carefully. Tang En looked at the blurry figure a few meters away. If you agree, you will have no relatives or friends in this life. You will only be accompanied by blood, killing, and cold corpses for the rest of your life. Apart from me, David, Luke, Harry, Josiah, you will have to stay away from everyone who knows you. Just like the mask you are wearing now, you can never let Michaud appear in front of them. No, I won't. In the dark, the hoarse voice sounded a little lonely. Michaud is dead. The mask is branded, and it can't be taken off. Silence. Tang En narrowed his eyes and stared at Michaud's face. After a while, he nodded expressionlessly. Very well. Chapter 738. In the afternoon, the sun was shining brightly. Tang En rushed to the cold water river. As soon as he entered Lena's alchemy lab, he was surprised to find that a fight had already broken out. A lot of people were gathered around the small courtyard. There were David and the others who had been dismissed by Tang En earlier, as well as some members of the secret agency who had been sent to protect Lena. Most of the latter were shocked and a little frightened. As for the former, they were clapping and cheering heartlessly. Some were mocking and some were sighing. It was very lively, huh? Work harder, little Carol. Luke won't be able to hold on much longer. I'll kill him with a single slash. Sigh. Time really doesn't spare anyone. I didn't expect our great Arrow Marquis to have such a day. Wah. F***CK. Shut the F***CK up. Yo, you're unhappy. Look, how is it? I told you I got slashed again. In the middle of the crowd, Luke, who was holding a dagger, wasn't in a good situation. He kept retreating and waving his dagger as he wandered around, unable to fight back at all. His black clothes were already tattered like rags, and he looked very miserable. On the other hand, the opponent who was chasing after the victory was ferocious. His figure was basically nowhere to be seen. One could only see blade lights swirling around his body, crisscrossing and attacking from all sorts of inconceivable angles. It was demonic and gorgeous. Little Carol raised an eyebrow. With Tang En's eyesight, he could naturally see through the dazzling blade light and see the attacker. He couldn't help but be surprised. What was going on? Mr. Arthur, you're back. Lena, who was also on the periphery, was the first to notice Tang En's arrival. Her eyes lit up and she walked over with a smile. Tang En waving greeting. Hi, Lena. this is... Why are they fighting? He was just a little puzzled and wasn't nervous. He could naturally tell that the two sides weren't fighting to the death, but were just playing around. It's fine. Lena covered her mouth and smiled. She said casually, I just made a scythe for little Carol. Mr. Luke suggested that we try it out first to see if it suited her, and then we started fighting. Oh, Tang En narrowed his long and narrow eyes. Sure enough, he found that the sickle little Carl was waving was very different from the previous farm sickle. He didn't know what metal it was made of, but the sickle was now completely black. The handle was slightly longer, and there was a thin silver chain at the end that wrapped around his arm. The front part of the blade was curved in a large arc, with a dark red luster, revealing its sharpness. On the other side, there were a few blades as thin as a cicada's wings. Although they were slightly shorter, they ensured that the sickle's original demonic attack style could be maintained. At the same time, they also made up for the loophole that it could only attack from one direction. The design was ingenious. Of course, this was from a practical point of view. In addition, although Tang En wasn't good at forging weapons, he could tell that the sickle built according to this design was very beautiful and instantly broke away from its previous image as a rustic farm tool. Beautiful. It feels classy. Tang En couldn't help but sigh. He nodded at Lena. Thank you, Lena. This weapon is really great. It's actually nothing. Looking at Tang En's sincere gaze, Lena brushed her hair behind her ear and her gaze drifted. I just made it casually in my free time. I like little Carol a lot, too. As long as there's nothing wrong with the sickle. A member of a secret agency was stunned when he heard that. He turned his head and looked at Lena with a strange expression. They were here as guards to protect Lena's safety. Naturally, they knew that Lena hadn't rested at all for the past 2 nights. She had been constantly looking up all kinds of information and drawing the sickle blueprint. Could this be considered casually making it? Tang Yin and Lena didn't notice the strange gazes as they looked at the center of the courtyard. This playful battle was about to come to an end. Luke was good at long-range archery. Although he wasn't weak in close combat, he naturally wasn't very good at it. At the very least, he was sure that he wasn't little Carol's match. In addition, David and the others kept making noise on the side, which upset him and made his attacks even more chaotic. Soon, he was unconsciously forced into a corner by little Carol. Compared to Luke, who was struggling, little Carol's attacks were much sharper. Although she had followed Tang in later, she had been personally taught by Tang Yin. For her, Tang Yin had even specially found a battle energy cultivation technique that could be cultivated to the void level and taught her several battle energy channels that didn't have any side effects. As a result, even David wouldn't be able to do well, let alone Luke, who wasn't good at close combat. In this gray space, apart from Tang Yin, only Michaud could slightly suppress little Carol. Swoosh! Suddenly, the sickle was raised, and it whistled through the air while countless blade lights instantly erupted. They surged wantonly like mercury, and they instantly covered the surrounding space completely. This biting cold attack left David and Harry speechless. Luke, who was in the middle of it, was even worse. He didn't dare resist at all, and subconsciously retreated again and again. However, he only took half a step back before his body froze. His heel had hit a step, and he couldn't retreat anymore. It's over. Just as Luke thought that, the dazzling blade light in front of him instantly disappeared, and the sky was clear again. Dragging her sickle, little Carol took a few steps back and bowed. She pursed her lips and said softly, "Thank you for going easy on me, Brother Luke." Although little Carol was very cold to everyone except for Tang Yin, she wasn't someone who didn't know what was good for her. She knew that Luke and the others cared about her, so she didn't go overboard and flattered Luke. But there was no doubt that this was useless. Not to mention the completely suppressive attack earlier. How could David and the others let go of the opportunity to ridicule Luke? Sure enough, there was a strange laugh. "Yo, Luke, you did well. You were actually able to tie with little Carol." The words tie were spoken clearly and with a slightly heavier tone. It was obvious that he was mocking Luke. Clap, clap. That's right. I didn't realize it before, but the Gray Arrow Marquis is indeed the Gray Arrow Marquis. Even if he's beaten like a drowning dog, he still has the demeanor of not bullying a junior. I'll applaud you, huh? Luke blushed slightly and waved at David and the others. T-Sich, if you have the guts, don't make sarcastic remarks. Come down and fight too. He's angry. Haha, he's flying to a rage out of humiliation. Hee, we won't learn from you and bully the weak. That's right. Also, it's a tag team battle. Don't you know that it's unfair? Luke opened his mouth, but was lost for words. He covered his face and stood alone in the wind. For a moment, he felt that he had made a stupid decision. Brother Tang Yin. Fortunately, at that moment, little Carol noticed Tang Yin, who was standing outside the crowd. She immediately screamed and helped Tang Yin out of the predicament. Laughing out loud, Tang Yin reached out and hugged little Carol, who had pounced on him. He smiled. "Long time no see, little Carol. You seem to be a little heavier. Brother Tang Yin, the sickle is heavier." In the end, she was a girl. Although she wasn't mature yet, little Carol still subconsciously defended her weight. This made Tang Yin laugh even harder. He tapped little Carol's nose. Our little Carol has grown up." After laughing and joking around, the crowd gradually dispersed. Only then did little Carol slowly climb down from Tang Yin, but she still clutched Tang Yin's collar tightly with one hand. She obediently bowed to Lena. "Thank you, Sister Lena, for the weapon you made for me. I'm very satisfied." "Hee hee, you're welcome. As long as you like it." Lena got along well with little Carol. She stroked her soft hair and smiled. No one knew that Lena had her own selfish motive for doing so. Lena had known Tang In for a long time. She knew that Tang In was alone and didn't have any relatives. Now, little Carol was his only family. So, as long as she was on good terms with little Carol, she would have an excuse to appear by Tang In's side from time to time. At this moment, David and the others couldn't be bothered to continue teasing Luke. They all gathered around Lena and looked at her with burning eyes. They rubbed their hands together and smiled fawningly. "Hey, Miss Lena, do you have time to take a look at my sword?" Of course, bah." "David, what's so good about your big sword?" "Miss Lena, don't listen to him. My short sword just happened to be broken." "Is that so?" "Hee hee, why did I see that your short sword was still intact this morning?" Lena was in the middle of the noisy crowd, and she was at a loss for what to do. This was also because David and the others were envious of little Carol's domineering sickle. This was normal, as martial artists, who didn't want to have a high-quality weapon. After all, it could very well be the guarantee of their lives. "All right, quiet down." Tang In frowned, and his gaze darkened. "Look at all of you. What are you all doing?" "Lena has a lot on her plate right now. Why are you still thinking about weapons?" The atmosphere turned cold. Lena looked at David and the others, who gradually lowered their heads and hurriedly waved her hand. "There's no need to be like this. Actually, ordinary weapons won't take up much of my time." He waved his hand solemnly. "No need to say any more. Lena, you don't have to spoil them, even if you have time." After a pause, Tang In quickly took out a dagger in his right hand and stepped forward. "Hee, why don't you take a look at my dagger first?" "Hey, I'm not spouting nonsense. Look at how cratered it is." "Huh?" Chapter 739. The Bounty Hunter Guild had accidentally set the location of the negotiation in Coldwater City, which had undoubtedly caught Tang In off guard. To be honest, because Lena and the others were here, Tang In didn't want any trouble to happen in Coldwater City. It was precisely because of this that he didn't choose to make a move despite knowing the location of the guild. Of course, changing the location of the negotiation for no reason was naturally out of the question, because it was easy for the other party to connect the dots. Fortunately, Misho, Luke, and the others had returned in time, increasing the strength at Tang In's disposal. In the end, he simply stopped thinking about it and decided to wait and see. 3 days later, in the West District of Coldwater City, Tang In, disguised as a middle-aged man, knocked on the door of a house. "Boss, you're here." David opened the door tiredly. Then, he opened his mouth and looked at the little boy beside Tang in surprise. "Oh, little Carol, you're here too?" "Hello, Brother David." Little Carol bowed indifferently. David couldn't be blamed for being surprised. Although little Carol was strong, everyone in the gray space knew that Tang In never let her take any risks, let alone facing the Bounty Hunter Guild this time. Tang In was a little helpless when he heard that. "There's nothing I can do. She won't listen no matter how I persuade her. What headache?" After a pause, he looked at little Carol's obviously pouting mouth, spread his hands, and said resentfully, "Forget it. It's good to broaden my horizons." "Okay, how's the situation?" After entering the house and greeting Harry, Luke, and the others, David led Tang into the attic window and pointed at the guild's hiding place in the distance. He shook his head helplessly. "Not very good. We've been monitoring it for 3 days, day and night, but we haven't found anything unusual. The secret agency hasn't detected any suspicious people entering the city either." Tang In nodded. He wasn't surprised by this. After all, they were the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. It would be strange if they were so easily tracked. Narrowing his eyes at the guild's hiding place in the distance, Tang In's lips curled up. "Since waiting for the rabbit doesn't work, let's lure the snake out of its hole." Sent a letter to him. The content of the letter will be the time and address of the negotiation that we previously agreed upon. He turned around and patted David's shoulder. "I'll keep an eye on this place. You guys take a good rest, and act according to the original plan. Don't make any mistakes. Hearing this, David's spirit was immediately refreshed, and his previous fatigue was instantly swept away. A meaningful smile appeared on the corner of his mouth. Boss, don't worry. I'll definitely give them a big gift. That's good. Go ahead. Then, David led Harry and the others out of the house. They all looked tired and a little excited. Little Carol furrowed her delicate brows and asked curiously, "Big brother, what gift?" Children shouldn't ask so many questions. What's with that expression of yours? When Tang Yin saw the corners of little Carl's mouth curl up, he rubbed his forehead and was speechless. "I'm just giving you a gift. Wait a little longer. You'll know soon enough." Oh. Little Carol lowered her head slightly and didn't continue to ask. However, Tang Yin glanced over and grimaced as if he had a toothache. He said seriously, "Don't think that I don't know what you're thinking. Remember, we agreed. You just have to protect Lena this time. You're not allowed to interfere in anything else." With her thoughts guessed, little Carol could only pout and nod with an aggrieved expression. Seeing this, Tang Yin knew that this expression was mostly an act, but he still couldn't bear it. He stroked little Carol's soft hair and comforted her. "The enemy this time is too strong. Big Brother will definitely bring you along next time. Do you want to track them with Big Brother later and see if your skills have fallen behind?" Of course not. After all, she had received Tang Yin's promise. Little Carol stopped at the right time and raised her little face proudly. "Big Brother Harry can prove my hiding and tracking skills." This was the truth. Previously, when Tang Yin set off for the front line, he expected that little Carol wouldn't stay at the station peacefully, so he ordered Harry to secretly follow and protect her. However, he didn't expect that little Carol would wander outside for more than half a year, even being chased by people from the Temple of Light, but Harry still couldn't find her. The corner of his mouth twitched. Tang Yin nodded expressionlessly. "Okay. It seems that it's necessary to increase the training of these brats." Not to mention how David and the others would torture Harry, who had asked them to go down after hearing Tang Yin's words. At noon, a few eye-catching people finally appeared in front of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Lifting a gap in the curtain, Tang Yin narrowed his eyes at the cold-looking warriors in the distance and murmured in a low voice, "5 Earth Stage warriors. TSK, TSK. As expected of the Bounty Hunter Guild. How generous. Oh, they're quite careful." Without a doubt, 3 days had passed. The other party must have arrived at Hansui City. The reason why they hadn't been discovered here could only mean that the other party hadn't entered the Bounty Hunter Guild here at all. Tang Yin had asked David to hand over the negotiation address. Originally, he wanted to follow the messenger from the guild and confirm the other party's whereabouts. However, he didn't expect the other party to be so cautious. They did the opposite and directly sent 5 Earth Stage warriors to ask for information. However, little Carol looked slightly embarrassed. Although she couldn't see the other party's strength with her cultivation, with Big Brother Tang Yin around, how could a mere Earth Stage warrior escape their tracking? Putting down the curtain, Tang Yin reached out and messed up his hair, looking even more down and out. "Let's go. We'll wait for them at the street entrance." Of course, there was no problem with the surveillance location David and the others chose. Although it was a little far from the guild's hiding place, it was very close to the only street entrance here. In this way, no matter what the people in the guild wanted to do, they could quickly intercept them. At noon, the streets were naturally lively. Although the location here was a little remote, there were still many pedestrians on the road. Tang Yin was dressed in rags. His face was pale, and his eyes were full of confusion and emptiness about the future. Little Carol, who was behind him, was dressed as a boy. Her gray cotton-padded jacket was full of patches. She lowered her head and followed behind Tang Yin. Her footsteps were slow, and she looked completely like a lifeless, homeless father and son. She didn't attract the slightest bit of attention. Compared to the rich South, the north of Bran was still very poor. Therefore, even in the city, it was not uncommon to see homeless people. When the surrounding passers-by saw Tang Yin and little Carol, They all subconsciously covered their noses and avoided them. Their expressions were full of disdain, intentional or unintentional. Of course, this was also the effect Tang wanted. While walking aimlessly, he casually looked around, waiting for the arrival of the 5 Earth Stage warriors. However, before he could finish the intersection, suddenly, Tang Un's gaze instantly shrank, and his footsteps paused for a while. His expression changed slightly. Little Carol, who was following behind, was stunned when she saw this. She subconsciously wanted to follow Tang Un's line of sight. Lower your head. Right street corner. Without turning his head, Tang Un's lips moved slightly, and his voice was clearly transmitted. Then, he took the lead and walked to the right street corner. No one cared about this short pause. Tang In and Little Carol also successfully entered the right street corner under the cover of the crowd. As soon as they stepped in, Tang In instantly stuck to the wall of the corner shop. Looking at Little Carol's puzzled expression, he solemnly waved his hand. Sorry, the tracking plan we agreed to before is canceled. You go back immediately. Little Carol was slightly startled when she heard this. Then, she nodded and turned to leave. Little Carol knew very well that if it weren't for an unexpected situation that couldn't be controlled, her brother wouldn't have made such a serious expression. This was all for her safety. Seeing Little Carol's figure disappear into the crowd, Tang In breathed a sigh of relief. Then, he took a few steps to the side and squinted at the crystal glass of the house across the street. It was reflecting the street on the other side of the intersection. Behind the figures that passed by from time to time, an old man in green with white hair was sitting on a bench by the roadside. His eyes were slightly narrowed, and he was concentrating on reading the newspaper in his hand. He looked interested. From an ordinary person's point of view, this was an ordinary old man who couldn't bear the loneliness at home and came to this bustling street to experience the vitality of the world. But in Tang In's eyes, there was a rare look of hesitation. If one wanted to determine the level of a martial artist's strength, it was undoubtedly the most reliable to directly test them. But if one were to estimate based on one's eyesight alone, then it was more difficult to say, unless the difference in the realm between the two sides was too great, or if one had undergone systematic training like Tang In, coupled with the experience of surviving hundreds of battles, relying on his keen perception, he could vaguely make a judgment from the degree of danger the other party gave him. Just like those 5 Earth Stage martial artists just now, of course, this kind of judgment based on the naked I would undoubtedly be interfered with by various factors. For example, the other party's strength was similar, or the other party was good at hiding their aura, and so on. The result obtained would have serious errors. And this old man in green in front of him gave Tang In a more ethereal feeling. At first glance, there wasn't anything striking about him, but there was an indescribable vague feeling. And it was this vague feeling that made Tang In take another serious look at the other party. In the end, the feeling was still the same, so he decisively ordered Little Carol to retreat. The old butler had once commented that the essence of the Do Chi of another world was tyrannical. This kind of violent power that was like a volcanic eruption was very difficult to hide and could be recognized at a glance. Of course, there were also talented people who could return to their natural state and restrain all their aura. For example, the brandsword god Wu Ding, who often hung around the mouth of the old man in the palace's library in the northern wilderness. However, Tang In didn't think that the other party could reach that realm, so the ethereal feeling in his heart should be because the two sides were similar in strength. Void realm? Tang In inhaled slightly. To be honest, because the cultivation system was very different, Tang In also didn't know what level his strength was at in the otherworld cultivation system. But what he could confirm was that among all the Earth Stage martial artists he had met, except for Sylvia, he was relatively invincible. But he still had to confirm it before he could feel at ease. After thinking about it, Tang In still walked to the corner of the street, poked his head out slightly, and said in his heart, "Aura observation. Aura observation. See through mountains and rivers. See through all things." This was a skill in the layout skill tree. According to the old butler, This skill was derived from heaven's perception. It could vaguely determine a person's strength and danger level, and also allow one to see through the landscape at a glance and choose the most suitable place for assassination. In short, it was extremely mysterious. Even if he didn't understand it, he felt that it was awesome. Whoosh! Suddenly, a breeze blew past, and the newspaper fluttered. The old man in green sitting on the bench seemed to have sensed something and suddenly raised his head. His slightly narrowed eyes flashed with a biting cold light as he looked at the corner of the street. It was empty, and there was no movement at the corner of the street. After a few breaths, a middle-aged couple turned out and walked straight into a shop. The old man in green frowned slightly, then shook his head slightly and continued to look down at the newspaper. At the corner of the street, "Phew!" Tang In stared at the crystal glass opposite him and let out a long sigh of relief. He didn't know if it was because of the side effect of the skill or because Tang In hadn't practiced it to perfection, but when he used the aura observation skill just now, the old man in green instantly sensed it. Fortunately, he reacted quickly and retreated in time. Otherwise, he would have been caught by the other party. However, although it was a bit risky, Tang In also got the result he wanted. Under the aura observation, Tang In finally smelled a deep sense of danger from the old man in green. Although he couldn't accurately determine the other party's strength, it was definitely on the verge of void stage. His expression darkened. He really is a void stage martial artist. Frowning, Tang In didn't think that his luck would be so good or so bad that he would accidentally run into a rare void stage martial artist when he went out. Sure enough, just as Tang Un was struggling, the 5 Earth stage martial artists who appeared in front of the Bounty Hunter Guild drove the carriage back. They glanced at the old man in green, nodded slightly, then put down the curtain and continued to move forward. The old man in green folded the newspaper and walked into the crowd unhurriedly, faintly following behind. Damn, they really want to play dirty. Narrowing his long and narrow eyes, Tang In once again fiddled with his scattered hair, twisted his body to adjust his state, and walked towards the old man in green. It was just a negotiation. Even if it was for safety, it was not necessary to put out such a big lineup of a void stage martial artist and 5 Earth stage martial artists. There was no doubt that the other party came with bad intentions this time. Since he knew this, if he didn't want the original plan to fail, Tang In had to accurately determine the strength of the old man in green. Of course, this was not a personal test. Although Tang In was confident that he would not be discovered when he approached the other party. If he made a move, even if he revealed a trace of killing intent, the other party would sense it. Looking left and right, Tang Un's eyes flashed slightly, staring at a rough man who was holding a heavy sword and dressed as a mercenary. There were a lot of mercenaries in the other world. Any martial artist with a bit of strength wouldn't reject a mercenary profession that could bring them extra benefits. After observing the distance between the two parties, Tang In quietly moved his feet. Relying on his current bad image, which made people want to avoid him, he quietly controlled the direction of the crowd around him and secretly forced the burly man to the opposite side of the old man in green. 20 steps, 10 steps, 5 steps, Tang Un's eyes flashed. He seemed to inadvertently raise his hand to scratch his head, but in fact he pushed the waist of the young man next to him without leaving a trace. It seemed to be an empty push, but the young man staggered to the side as if he was drunk. With a cry of surprise, he involuntarily bumped into the woman next to him. The woman was caught off guard and fell to the side again. After connecting with 3 or 4 people, he finally reached the rough man. After all, he was a martial artist. The big man's reaction was not slow, and he quickly dodged to the side. However, although he dodged, the heavy sword in his hand unconsciously swept horizontally, as if it was an attack, directly in front of the old man in green. With an indifferent expression, the old man in green stopped in his tracks, as if he did not see it, and avoided the heavy sword in front of his eyes. Unfortunately, Tang In, who had been observing from the corner of his eye, could not help but frown slightly. He did not expect the other party's character to be so good. Even if he was offended by the weak big man, He did not seem to be angry at all. Of course, there was also a possibility that this big man was too weak and the old man in green was too lazy to teach him a lesson. But no matter what, if he missed this opportunity, Tang In could only think of other ways to test him. But at this moment, what are you looking at? Get out of my way. Tang In turned his head in surprise. It turned out that the old man in green had just stopped and met the rough man face to face. Originally, under normal circumstances, if the two of them leaned to the side at the same time, or if one of them stepped aside and brushed past each other, they would be at peace. However, this rough man had a fiery temper. Usually, he was used to causing trouble. When he saw the old man in green blocking in front of him, he did not even think about it and directly swore and stretched out his hand to push him. Damn, thank your whole family. Tang In was overjoyed when he saw this and immediately stopped to watch. The old man in green, who had already stepped to the side, paused. The wrinkles at the corner of his eyes obviously twitched, and he slowly raised his head to look at the big man. Whoosh! There was a small commotion, and the surrounding people unconsciously hugged their shoulders. They only felt that they had suddenly entered a cold winter. The surrounding air seemed to have frozen in an instant, and the biting cold was biting cold. The rough man's body suddenly stiffened, and his pushing arms stopped in midair, motionless like a statue. At this time, if someone stood in front of him, they would see that his eyes were full of horror and fear. Humph! With a light snort, the old man in green walked past the big man, and an imperceptible blade light flashed. After a few breaths, the surrounding cold air instantly disappeared as if it had never appeared. Then, clang, the heavy sword fell to the ground, and before the sound of metal hitting metal ended, a high-pitched scream was heard. Ah! The left arm of the rough man was suddenly cut off at the shoulder and strangely slipped down. Chee-chee-chee! Scarlet blood instantly spurted out, drenching the faces of several passers-by directly opposite. A young woman subconsciously wiped the blood on her face, lowered her head, and spread out her hands. Her eyes rolled back, and she simply fell to the ground. Whoosh! Screams rose one after another, and chaos instantly erupted in the center of the street. Tang did not care about the chaos. According to the cold, killing intent emitted by the old man in green just now, he secretly estimated the strength of the other party in his heart, and then he was slightly relieved with a look of relief. Fortunately, he should have just stepped into the threshold of the Void Realm, and his strength should be similar to Yama's. Turning his head to look at the old man in green who blended into the crowd, Tang In thought for a moment, and then pushed away the panicked crowd and leaned over to press down the big man who was rolling on the ground and constantly wailing. With a sigh, he tore off a strip of cloth from his body and simply bandaged the wound on his shoulder, slightly stopping the bleeding. Then he picked up the broken arm and a gold note and stuffed it into the arms of the big man. Looking up, he patted the shoulder of the big man with a pale face. Hurry up and go to the church. You should be able to reconnect it. Also, sorry. Thank you. Chapter 740. In the afternoon, somewhere in the northern district of Hanshui City, there were many manors, luxurious in style. The concept of hierarchy in this world was very strong, and the glory of the nobles was sacred. Therefore, in the eastern district of the city, only those with titles or the heads of the city's administrative departments could live there. As for the rich merchants and so on, although they were not weaker than the nobles in terms of economic strength, and some are even better, they could only live elsewhere because of their status, such as this large, luxurious manor. The negotiation team of the Bounty Hunter Guild that the secret agency could not find was now hiding in a large manor. At this time, as a few carriages slowly drove in, an old man in brown and a middle-aged man with a slightly gloomy face quickly greeted them in the manor. These two people were the upper echelons of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild sent to negotiate this time. Without waiting for the carriage to stop, a few cold-looking warriors jumped down from it and saluted in unison, "Greetings to the two lords." With a wave of his hand, the middle-aged man did not care about politeness and asked directly, "How is it Is there any news? Yes. An Earth Stage warrior simply took out a letter from his arms and handed it over. The middle-aged man took it and opened it. Glancing at it, he could not help but raise his eyebrows. Early this morning, south of Hansui River. So fast. One must know that they had only just arrived here this morning. They did not expect to receive news of the negotiation at night. The other party's high efficiency inevitably caught them off guard. If it's not a trap, this is good news. It means that the other party may not be able to hold on. The old man in brown was very optimistic. He chuckled twice and then asked seriously the source of this letter. The leading Earth Stage warrior shook his head. The guild said that a child sent it in, and the reward is 3 candies. The old man in brown was stunned, then shook his head and laughed. A bit interesting. And on the way back, did you notice anyone following you? Before the Earth Stage warrior could answer, a flat voice came. It's a bit strange, but as far as I can see, there's no one. The old man in brown and the middle-aged man turned their heads and looked at the old man in green who had entered the manor at some point. They both nodded politely. Old Goo, you've worked hard. After all, he was a Void Stage warrior, and the treatment he received was naturally different from the 5 Earth Stage warriors beside him. The green-robed old man called Goo Goo waved his hand and said calmly, It's just around. You don't have to be so polite. Although Old Man Goo's strength was the highest, his status was obviously not as high as these 2 higher-ups. Therefore, he did not display any arrogance. Both sides exchanged pleasantries before the brown-robed elder said doubtfully, That's strange. According to the other party's previous behavior, they shouldn't have given up on probing so easily. As the saying goes, a person counts himself, and a person counts others. Tang In and the others wanted to track down the person who came to receive the letter and determine the other party's whereabouts. The higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild also wanted to beat them at their own game and lure them here to confirm the identities of Tang In and the others. Maybe he was scared. No matter what, we have 5 Earth Stage warriors on the surface. The middle-aged man curled his lips and said proudly, That's good too. Let's give them a show of strength and let them know what kind of invincible existence they have provoked this time. These words were sonorous and powerful. The 5 Earth Stage warriors around them could not help but raise their heads slightly when they heard them, their gazes proud. However, the brown-robed elder and Old Man Goo's reactions were very calm. The former could not help but frown with a hint of worry in his expression. The middle-aged man glanced at them and shook his head slightly. He chuckled and said, Don't worry. With the strength of our lineup this time, the other party will not expect it and will not be able to resist. We are destined to die. These were not arrogant words. An expert who had touched the threshold of Void Stage, 5 Earth Stage warriors, and many accompanying guards. With this kind of strength, it was enough to intimidate this city, let alone run rampant in the world. The brown-robed elder pondered for a while and did not immediately express his opinion. Instead, he continued to ask, The location of the negotiation is on the south side of Hansui River. Where's this? After all, they had just arrived in Hansui City. Naturally, it was impossible for them to know everything about the city immediately. However, the few Earth Stage warriors had obviously inquired, Sir, this location is in the southern city district, relatively close to the southern city wall. The middle-aged man's eyes flashed when he heard this. He thought he understood the other party's intention and could not help but smile sarcastically. Do you want to use the garrison to scare us? What a bunch of stupid guys. Perhaps they want to escape. He waved his hand disapprovingly. Can you escape by hiding underwater? Aren't you looking down on Old Man Goo too much? After a pause, the middle-aged man did not hesitate anymore. He waved his hand decisively and ordered, Send someone to investigate the location of the negotiation in the afternoon. If there are no problems, we will go there in advance at night to make preparations. The brown-robed elder opened his mouth. He felt that the other party was not that simple, but the facts in front of him were indeed no room for argument. In the end, he could only shut his mouth and take it as a tacit agreement. However, What they did not know was that, just as they were about to take action, a figure easily avoided the surrounding guards and climbed over the back wall of the manor. Looking back, he muttered to himself, "This is too much. It seems that I have to calm down and prepare to be worthy of these big shots who came from afar." Throughout the afternoon, Hanshui City was as noisy and lively as usual. The sun hanging in the sky also followed its unchanging path and gradually set to the west. The light was bright, dazzling, white, and gloomy. It constantly changed, just like a short life, from a beautiful woman to a white-haired woman. The image was profound and profound. In the evening, the afterglow was fading and twilight was approaching. Among the undulating buildings by the cold water river, a figure was secretly peeking his head out from a pointed roof, holding a strange-looking object as he looked around the other side of the river. Perhaps he did not discover anything, so he slowly retracted his head, but after a few minutes, he peeked his head out again. This cycle repeated itself, making people feel baffled. "Okay, Sister Lena, don't look anymore. It's not time yet. The other party can't come so early." On one side of the roof, little Carl leaned on her sickle and looked at the busy Lena up and down. Finally, she had no choice but to persuade her. Lena, who was lying on the roof, held the binoculars and said without turning her head, "What if," she sighed, "even if there's a chance, we can't do anything, right?" That's true." Lena was taken aback when she heard this. Then she put down the binoculars and crawled back. She said worriedly, "I don't know how many bounty hunters are here. Are they powerful? Can Mr. Arthur beat?" "Sigh." Little Carl blinked and said, "Not bounty hunters, but people from the Bounty Hunter Guild. It's all the same. They're not good people." Lena's attitude was quite firm. Little Carl opened her mouth and wisely gave up on this question. Instead, she comforted, "Sister Lena, don't worry. No matter how many people they have this time, Brother knows. So as long as there are no big accidents, Brother will win this battle. You also said there will be accidents. Maybe. I'm just saying maybe. Well, there's no such possibility. Brother will win. Then is it possible or not? Or is it impossible?" Lena's serious expression proved that she wasn't being unreasonable. "That's not the point of this sentence." Little Carl was a little helpless. Sorry, I might be a little too nervous." Lena looked at little Carl's tangled expression and couldn't help but feel embarrassed. Then she subconsciously crawled up to the roof again and raised the binoculars. "Why aren't they here yet? If the other party really comes, Sister Lena, you can't look anymore." Little Carl shook her head helplessly. "The other party has an expert. An expert have always been sensitive to prying eyes, so..." Before she finished speaking, Lena's body suddenly shook. She quickly turned her head and said anxiously, "Little Carl, come quickly. Come quickly and see if that's it." Little Carl was startled when she heard this. She immediately turned over and took the binoculars, squinting her eyes. The Hanshui River was the symbol of Hanshui City, so no matter what time it was, there were almost always people on both sides of the river. Now it was evening. They were either chatting as they passed by, taking a walk after dinner, or setting up a stove to barbecue on the riverbank. There were all kinds of people. And now, at the lower reaches of the river, where there were fewer people, about 50 people suddenly rushed in together. They had a clear division of labor, and soon they set up a prototype of a tent more than 100 meters away from the river. This action was undoubtedly strange. The Hanshui River was very popular, but it was still a river after all. The surrounding cold air was very strong, so even some homeless people who had nowhere to stay would not choose to camp here for the night. Obviously, there was something wrong with this group of people. After a few glances and seeing a few familiar figures from the afternoon, little Carl directly pulled Lena away from the roof. Her small face was solemn. "It's them." Lena's delicate body suddenly tensed up when she heard this. She slowed down and quickly asked, "They're really here? How many people are there? Is the expert you mentioned here?" After asking a series of questions, Zhang Xian seemed to have thought of something and subconsciously walked down the wooden stairs. "No, the other party came early. I have to inform Mr. Arthur." Little Carl grabbed Lena's arm and said helplessly, "No need, Sister Lena. Brother and the others are already here. We can see each other, so naturally, brother and the others can too. The reason was simple. Lena also lost her sense of propriety in a hurry, so she didn't think of this. Seeing Lena suddenly stop, little Carl patted her arm and said firmly again, "Don't worry, brother will win." Lena reluctantly nodded. And then she clasped her hands tightly and put them in front of her lowered forehead, making a devout prayer. This was the only thing she could do now. Compared to the nervous Lena, little Carl was much calmer. It was not that she was not worried, but she believed in Brother Tang's strength more. It was this relaxed mood that made little Carl realize something else. She tilted her head and looked at Lena's tense face with a puzzled expression. Strange, isn't Sister Lena a little too concerned? You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.